So hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to. So we are back with a brand new movie on WHAGT if Naruto had tried to avoid Tsunade interaction movie, but before we start, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Now let's begin the story. Laughter could be heard in the backyard from the many children currently running around playing ninja, which was a different type of tag. Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto sat on the patio of his home watching the little bundles of energy with whisker marks running around without a care in the world. Naruto himself was watching the happy children with a content smile on his lips. Bringing the cup in his hand to his lips, he sighed contentedly at the delicious taste. Hinata always did make the best tea in his opinion. He chalked that up to her loving to perform tea ceremonies. That's right. You better run, you little brats. Naruto laughed as Anko started chasing the now screaming children. She was a loving mother and spouse, but sometimes her enthusiasm would get the best of her and she'd scare the children. Only a few wouldn't cower from her, and those were generally the ones she birthed. Yet if anyone ever threatened any of the children, her mama fox instincts would skyrocket and she would ensure her kits were safe. High-pitched squeals of both surprise and amusement could be heard as snakes started slithering out into the yard, each carrying a child who were either laughing or pouting at being caught. Anko came out not too much sooner with two of the kids under her arms. She looked absolutely beautiful to him. Granted, she was a beautiful woman that most men envied to be wedded to, with a body that many women would kill for. She was dressed in a simple black kimono, much like how Shizune-chan's was, only there were two long slits on the sides of her legs, making her long-toned legs look even more enticing than they used to in her old outfit. She still kept the fishnet outfit underneath the kimono, but much less of it showed to provide some modesty for the kids. Anko-chan, please don't be too rough with the children. Naruto turned to the source of the voice, who just happened to be Ino, standing by the garden tending to the various flowers and such. Old habits die hard, they say, but for Ino, tending the garden was more of a personal hobby that she enjoyed. Naruto was very sure it was from her time working in her family's flower shop. To him though, Ino was a beautiful flower that outshined the ones she was tending to, something that he enjoyed in reminding her of, much to her embarrassment. In public, she was very confident in her looks, yet even after all these years, Naruto still could make her blush. The same could be said for all his loved ones, and he cherished all of them, from their faults to their traits that made them stand out. Just like the one walking up to take her place next to him as she looked into his eyes and asked, "What seems to be on your mind, my love?" Naruto stared back into hers, replying, "Nothing really. Just reminiscing on my life and how truly lucky I am, all things considering." His wife looked down, thinking about the past actions that led up to this moment, before running her hand over her swollen belly with a small smile on her lips. She herself had trouble believing that this was real and that she was pregnant again with their third and fourth child, twins. She hoped fraternal instead of identical. She worried enough about forgetting one of their current children's names, she didn't need the aggravation of mistaking one for the other. Hinata and Sarah were fortunate that their set of twins were a boy and a girl. Thinking back though to all they had to do to get here, she figured this was well deserved, so she said, "Don't fret about it, my love. Yes, all things considered, we are lucky that we have the happy ending that most dream about." Looking around at all the children that were being rounded up by her sister wives, she giggled a bit before adding, "More or less, but don't think that we aren't any less deserving of our current happiness. You especially, my love." Naruto could detect the sadness in her voice at that last part. Yes, out of everyone here, he probably had it the worst. His childhood was still a sore subject and would rarely give him nightmares. However, he would quickly be enveloped by the loving embraces of his wives, while they would whisper reassuring words of comfort. Words that would drive back the negative feelings of suffering and pain. He would be forever grateful that they were in his life and had blessed him with a rather abundant family. "Papa. Daddy. Tsunade." Naruto looked at his children running towards him and instantly felt warmth from all of the happy smiles on their faces. They all looked so different from one another, with a few traits shared between them. The trait they all seemed to have was his whisker-marked cheeks. Naruto could already guess it was going to be a trait that would soon be associated with the Uzumaki Namikaze clan. Not that he minded, since a few of his children also had red hair from either one of his wives or from the rare gene that had not manifested in himself but came from his mother. He didn't care either way, since he loved all his children, just like he loved his wives. Looking around, he spotted a few of them making their way towards him as well. Hinata had found her way to his unoccupied side, while others found places with the children or on the various spots around him. Each one of them gave him a kiss before sitting down. Haku and Anko were an exception, since instead of walking away, Anko stole the plate of dango he was enjoying, while Haku had decided to rest her head on his lap. Taking in the faces of his kids, he wondered where his older children had gone off to. He didn't think on it long, as all the ones present had started yelling, "Story time." His wives giggled or laughed at the enthusiasm while Naruto smiled at their behavior. Yet today Naruto was planning on sharing a story that he had told his teenage almost adult children about around the same age as everyone in front of him were. One of his daughters, Kagome, that looked just like his wife Koyuki, raised her hand asking, "Oto-san, what story are we going to hear this time?" His smile dropped some as he replied, "The story I have today is a long one. It's one that I told your older siblings around the same time they themselves were 10. But I should warn you, this story doesn't start with a happy beginning." His youngest son between himself and Haku, Shen, spoke asking, "Does it have a happy ending? Your stories with happy endings are always the best." Naruto's smile once more lit up. "By far, this story has the best happy ending I can think of. It's a story about my life, how I grew up, and most importantly how I eventually met all you mothers and fell in love with them equally." He looked around at the many faces of his wives, each one showing love and warmth in their gaze, which was equally mirrored in his gaze. For the ones sitting next to him, he wrapped them up with his tails and bringing them closer to him. If there was one thing he could say that was the best thing about having 6 fox tails, it was that he could hold more than one of his wives close to him. Looking at his children he spoke, "All right. This story takes place when I was a 5-year-old boy. October 10 to 5 years after the Kyuubi no Kitsune incident, Konohagakure no Soda." October 10th symbolized many things to the people of Konohagakure no Soda, or Konoha, for short, as most people call it. For many it was a day to mourn the loved ones long since departed from the world of the living. For others, it was a day of celebration for the defeat of the Kyuubi no Kitsune at the hands of the Yondaime Hokage. In the streets of the village hidden in the leaves, many civilians and ninja alike were laughing at stories told, drinking and eating their fill to their heart's content, and generally having fun. On the surface things appeared peaceful within the walls of the village under the watchful gazes of the past Hokages carved into the rock wall above the Hokage's office. However, if you look past the smiles, the laughing, and the happiness, you'd find a group of villagers who had been drinking excessively walking towards an apartment building. The apartment building was in disrepair, with many cracks and holes in the walls and flooring. Supposedly the building would have been torn down during the Yondaime's reign as Hokage, but after the reconstruction of the village the apartment complex was simply ignored. Over the years, the landlord had seen fit to renovate many of the rooms in the building, much to the tenants' delight, save for one. This one apartment was by far the worst room in the whole building. The roof had several leaks allowing for water to fall into the assorted bowls and pots laid out on the floor. The main windows had cracks in the glass, some with holes the size of fists, which didn't prevent the cold air from getting in on those winter nights. Pieces of the floorboards were missing. There was no hot water for those days and the plumbing didn't run efficiently. Yet in this run-down home there was life in the form of a few assorted flowers in full bloom even with the chill of autumn in the air. Across the large glass door hung a banner in all manner of assorted bright colors that read, "Happy Birthday." Yes, in this home lived a person, a boy to be more precise at the age of 5 now, seeing as October 10th was his birthday. This boy had spent months saving money, even foregoing eating a few days and nights out of the week, all in an effort to throw a birthday party. Strategically scattered throughout the apartment were candles pushing back the darkness of the night. The electricity was another issue that sporadically went out without warning or was simply cut because of the landlord. The boy spent many hours learning how to cook and bake the many different foods assorted and laid out in the kitchen. The banner had been hand-drawn and crafted with orange string, his favorite color. Finally, the cake was laid out on the table, a medium-sized rectangular cake with a simple, "Happy Birthday Naruto." At normal parties for children, there would have been laughter and other children running and playing with the birthday boy or girl. Yet in this run-down home there was no laughter, no joy. Nothing but silence hung in the air, occasionally interrupted by the sounds from outside. That was until the boy named Uzumaki Naruto took a small xylophone, one of the only toys he owned from when he was living in the orphanage, and started playing the lullaby for "Happy Birthday to You." Naruto, whose face was illuminated by the soft glow from the candles on his cake, started feeling moisture escaping from his eyes. He didn't sob or sigh or any of the noises you'd hear from a child in pain. He was completely silent. He was so sure that if he worked hard and invited his classmates to attend his party, that they'd show up. That day, however, in class, no one said anything to him. No wishes of good fortune were uttered, and certainly no presents were handed to him. Still, the young Naruto hoped that with the sign he made for the bulletin board informing his other classmates about the party, that at least one person would come. Just one would be enough for him, if only to escape from the quietness of his apartment. As he finished playing the tune on his small child instrument, Naruto looked at the 5 arranged candles on his cake. He heard from overhearing other children at school and from his time at the orphanage that when you blow out the candles you make a wish. Looking at the small flames, he could only think of one thing he would want. He had seen it many times at the school. Every morning when arriving at the school steps, every afternoon when he would see the other kids leave. All he wanted was just someone to look at him, not with eyes filled with hate or disgust, but with fondness and love. Someone who would tell him to have a good day at school, and be there after to take his hand and ask how his day was. He didn't think this was a selfish request, but if only for one day he could feel safe and loved, then he could say that he was the luckiest boy in the world. Deciding to try and see if the wish worked, closing his eyes he clapped his hands together in a small form of prayer in that his wish for a mother or father would be heard and fulfilled. Releasing his hands, he took a deep breath and released as much wind as he could to blow out the candles. Nodding in satisfaction, he went to cut him a slice when a sound from outside caught his attention. Moving to the window, he looked down and spotted several villagers yelling and moving towards his apartment. His face immediately took on a frightful expression. If the villagers were coming here to do the usual, then he would be on his own tonight. He couldn't rely on Gigi tonight since he mentioned that he had to see the fire feudal lord in the capital city. He also couldn't rely on the Anbu with the white spiky hair who protected him a few times. He hadn't seen him around much, maybe he was on a mission out of the village. Regardless, Naruto was on his own tonight. A very frightening thought because the once few villagers was starting to turn into a dozen at least. Thinking quickly, he went and extinguished all the candles so that in case he didn't come back tonight, he wouldn't find what little he had burned down to ash. After that was accomplished, Naruto went to climb out his window and used the drain gutter to climb down with practiced ease. As he reached the bottom, doing his best to avoid detection, he made his way away from the apartment building to try to head somewhere relatively safe. Sadly, the only real safe place he found was the training ground 44 designated as the Forest of Death. As he made his way through an alley, he peeked around the corner to see if anyone was waiting for him at the end. Normally the villagers wouldn't attack him out in the middle of the road. Generally, they wait until he is in a secluded area to attack him. The problem he faced was his apartment was surrounded by alleyways, almost as if he was cursed to seclude himself first to reach safety. Making his way down the alleyway, he was starting to feel optimistic about getting out. However, his optimism might have been premature. Naruto felt something heavy hit the back of his head with a fair amount of force that forced him to run into the trash can off to the side. His vision was blurry, but he could feel the unbearable throbbing coming from the side of his head along with something warm running down the side of his neck. That same warmness was also running down from his eyebrow where he gingerly placed two of his fingers at. When he looked at them, they were coated with his blood. Frightened, he looked around to see a couple of Konoha's ninjas. From the green flak vests they wore, he guessed they were Chunins. They weren't alone though, as the mob of villagers had now gathered around him. Looking around for an escape, Naruto backed himself against the wall in a feeble attempt to get away from them. They laughed at his actions, proclaiming that he was stuck with them and that they were going to finish what the Yondaime Hokage started. Shouts of agreement were voiced through the crowd as some shouted that today the demon's end has come. Naruto never understood why they called him a demon. He never understood why he had to endure this at all. Endured he did though. Each session he endured, even though after each session he just wished that he would die. Tonight was no different for the young Naruto. For the next few hours he cried and prayed that they would stop and show mercy for once. However, like every other session, there would be no mercy as the villagers beat him to the point of breaking a few of his bones. The worst came when he felt his clothes being forcefully ripped. Some of the more sadistic and vile villagers had taken to violating his body a few times on multiple sessions with multiple people joining in. He never felt so disgusted. Not when he had to eat rotten food from the garbage because he couldn't afford to buy anything to eat, or when that was all the shop owners sold him at overpriced rates. Not when he had to go days without showers because the water in his apartment wasn't working. He didn't know what he did to deserve this, nor why the villagers felt the need to repeat their actions. He didn't do anything. So here young Naruto was, laying in a pool of a mixture of blood, sweat, and other bodily fluids. His eyes had taken on a due tone. He unconsciously shut his brain down to not feel anything while the mob assaulted him. Now that the villagers had left, he could feel the pain from everywhere they hit and violated his body. Looking down at the kunai embedded in his stomach, he slowly pulled it out to apply pressure to the wound. Trying to get on his hands and knees, Naruto began to crawl in the direction of the hospital. His face was contorted to a grimace with each movement he took. The whole time he crawled his way to the hospital, his tears continued to fall. Yet despite the agonizing pain he was in, no sound escaped from his mouth. Even during the attack, not a cry for help was made. Deep down he knew no help would come for him. So, his body, mind, and spirit had ceased calling for help. He was silent, yet he prayed one day that someone would hear the cries that his soul made. 1 week later, October 17th, Main Gate, Konohagakure no Sato. It was mid-afternoon in Konoha. People were still talking about the festival that had happened a week ago. Many were going about their day in the peaceful village that was their home. Walking through the gate was a pair of women who hadn't been a part of the festival in some time. The first of this pair of women was a blonde woman with a large bust and figure that many women would kill for and was widely regarded as the most beautiful kunoichi in the world. Her hair was set into two loose ponytails that ran a little past her shoulders. Her outfit consisted of a gray kimono-style blouse with no sleeves held closed by a broad, dark bluish-gray obi that matched her pants with a pair of open-toed, strappy black sandals with high heels. A green haori with the kanji for gamble in a red circle was worn over her blouse that was cut rather low, revealing her sizable cleavage. Other than her breasts, her most noticeable feature was her lovely facial features with a violet diamond resting on the center of her forehead. Her brown eyes told the story of many years of experience as a kunoichi, both strong and determined, but held a warmth for those she considered dear to her. The woman's name was Senju Tsunade, one of the three legendary Sannin, the Slug Princess, and, to her annoyance, the legendary Sucker. Despite the titles, she was also a medic whose skills and knowledge were unrivaled, as also considered to be the world's strongest kunoichi. Next to her was a fair-skinned woman of average height and slender build with black hair and eyes. Her shoulder-length hair was usually straight with bangs that covered her ears and framed her face. Normally she could be seen wearing a long bluish-black kimono with white trimmings, held close by a white obi, and open-toed sandals with low heels. Her name was Shizune, a renowned kunoichi herself who specialized in poisons and who had been Tsunade's apprentice and attendant. She had served the Slug Princess ever since her uncle, who was also Tsunade's lover at the time, had been killed during the last Shinobi War. Walking through the main gate of Konoha, Tsunade couldn't help the feeling of nostalgia she got from gazing at the massive entrance leading to the village she called home for many years. Looking further ahead towards the Hokage monument, her eyes fell on her grandfather's and granduncle's faces along with her sensei's. Continuing her walk towards the Hokage's tower, Tsunade was looking around, noticing the abundance of happiness and general positive attitude of the villagers. It reminded her of her childhood while Hashirama Ojisan was still Hokage. Everyone appears to be in good spirits today. Shizune spoke up, also taking in her surroundings. As they passed a tea shop, she overheard a female's voice asking for 5 more orders of dango. Shizune thought that was excessive, but also thought to each their own. Tsunade continued looking ahead towards the Hokage tower as she replied, "Yes, it does look that way. Makes me feel nostalgic after all these years. I wonder how that old man is doing with that so-called bane of the Hokage." Shizune looked curiously at her sensei, wondering what was the bane of the Hokage. Pushing that thought out of her mind, she looked around, noticing the stares that Tsunade-sama was receiving. Probably due to her sudden return to a village that she had left many years ago. Her progress was stopped when she accidentally bumped into her sensei, who seemed to have stopped. Looking at her mentor, she asked, "Tsunade-sama, is everything okay?" Tsunade didn't answer her but had a curious expression on her face as her gaze followed a boy with sun-kissed yellow hair, wearing a pair of white shorts and a black shirt with a red swirl on the front running. He looked adorable in Tsunade's opinion with his large smile on his face. As he disappeared, both Tsunade and Shizune's eyes widened at the sight of a group made up of chunins and a pair of anbu chasing and shouting after the boy. However, what caught their attention was the bright neon colors of pink, blue, and orange that covered every one of them. Tsunade couldn't help but burst into a fit of laughter at the sight. She didn't think one of the first things she'd see when coming back to the village was a young boy pulling a prank on seasoned shinobi. Shizune for her part laughed as well, but in a much calmer demeanor. Wiping a tear from her eye, Tsunade continued walking towards the Hokage's office. When the pair of women arrived at the reception desk, the woman manning the desk looked shocked by Tsunade's sudden appearance and quickly left to inform the Hokage. When she returned, she smiled warmly at them before bowing and stating that the Hokage would see them now. As they entered the room, they saw a gaunt-looking elder man with a gray goatee, a light tan face that had wrinkles and liver spots further showing his age. Wearing the customary uniform of the Hokage, a hat with a haori, a red full-length kimono that was tied with a white sash, Sarutobi Hiruzen sat behind his desk with his ever-present pipe and a warm smile as he laid eyes on his student. Hiruzen stood up, walking around his desk to greet one of his students with a hug which was well received and reciprocated. "Tsunade-heim, it is so good to see you after these many years," Hiruzen said as he loosened his hug to place his hands on her shoulders. "It's good to see you again, sensei. It looks like your worst nightmare still plagues you, till this day," Tsunade said, pointing at the wreath large stack of paperwork on the desk. "That's not the same pile from when I left, is it?" Hiruzen walked back to his seat with a heavy sigh. "With my luck it might as well be. Actually, I think it might be bigger than before." Sitting down and leaning back in his comfortable leather chair, Hiruzen looked at his student with an almost calculating gaze, trying to discern why after so long would his student, the very one who said she couldn't care less for this village, would return. Deciding to simply ask, he spoke, "Tsunade, I must confess I never thought I'd see you return in my lifetime. What brought this sudden call to home?" Tsunade for her part looked just as perplexed. "Truth be told, sensei, I'm not sure why." Both Shizune and Hiruzen seemed surprised and confused at this answer, but she continued talking. "For some reason I felt like I needed to come back. Like something needed to be done here. I'm not sure how else to explain it, but after a week of this feeling I said what the hell and decided to find out what the calling was." Her sensei placed his elbows on the table and interlocking his fingers, his gaze almost burning a hole into her. Out of the three Sannin, Tsunade never could openly lie to her sensei and not feel bad about it. Granted, she could lie and get away with it, but she did feel some manner of guilt that Hiruzen would pick up on. This, however, was not one of those times. As odd as it was for her, Tsunade just felt like coming home and began the process of paying off her huge debts from gambling before setting out. Finally, Hiruzen's lips formed a warm smile. "All right, Tsunade-heim, I'll accept that reason. You wouldn't be the first person to suddenly feel the urge to return home." Opening a drawer in his desk, Hiruzen pulled out a key and a scroll with the Senju seal on it. "I think you'll be happy to know that while you were away, I took the liberty of keeping the deed and key to your clan's estate. Everything should be intact and safe, just be warned you might have to dust a bit." He chuckled at that last part, already guessing how much dust collected after years of neglect in the Senju home. Tsunade grimaced at the thought of cleaning. It was never her strong suit. Thank God for Shizune, otherwise she wouldn't have survived her self-exile. "Thank you, sensei. It'll be nice to sleep somewhere that doesn't have people yelling or performing certain activities throughout the night." Tsunade caught a blush form on her apprentice's cheeks as if she remembered a few of those nights. "Well, to be fair, we were being loud as well from the drinking. Or was that just me?" Her thoughts were interrupted when an Anbu appeared on the side of the desk. "Hokage-sama, my apologies for interrupting, but an urgent matter has arisen that requires your attention at the hospital." Hiruzen sighed, already guessing what was the issue, or more like who was the issue. He looked up at his student before saying, "Excuse me, Tsunade-heim, but it seems there's work to be done." Tsunade held her hand up, dismissing the apology. "Don't worry, sensei, I understand. For now, me and Shizune are going to head over the compound and see how it's fared these past years." With Shizune replying with a "hi," Hiruzen bowed before making his way out of his office, stating that they would have more time to catch up later. Now outside and moving to the Senju compound, Tsunade was curious as to what could be so urgent at the hospital that required Hiruzen's attention. Such things didn't seem important to her now, so Tsunade looked towards her companion. "I say, after we see the state of the compound, we head into the village for dinner. Kami-sama knows I'm hungry and the long day of traveling is not helping." Shizune smiled at her master. "Hi Tsunade-sama, that sounds like a wonderful idea. If I remember correctly, this ramen stand had a delicious aroma coming out of it." October 17th evening. Market District, Kanahagakure no Sato. Naruto was rubbing his arm that was wrapped up in bandages. He sighed, remembering a group of villagers who punched and kicked him several times but relented after his favorite Enbu person with silver hair showed up and kicked their asses. He was then brought to the hospital to receive treatment. His Enbu guard had left him at the front desk, stating that he should be seen by a doctor. They almost refused him, but after Hokage Jiji showed up, they looked at his wounds and cuts. His right arm was put in a sling, unfortunately, which would make eating annoying since he was primarily right-handed. Considering the number of times this has happened, however, he was slowly becoming ambidextrous. After some more apologies from Ji-san, he was given money for his basic living and food. There was even a little extra so he could eat a few times at Ichiraku's with Tuchi Oji-san and Ayame Nichan. He always loved going to the ramen shack, and not just because of the food, which in his opinion every bowl feels like it was sent down as a gift from Kami-sama. What really sold the food was the owner and his daughter. Ever since the day Ayame Nichan had found him crying behind their shop, they had gone out of their way to make him feel welcomed. He loved going there as it felt warm and safe. Tuchi Oji-san and Ayame Nichan were among the few who treated him like a person instead of a punching bag. He could still remember how Ayame Nichan looked surprised when she saw him behind their stand rummaging for something to eat in their garbage bins. He was frightened at first as he thought she would run him off or beat him. It wasn't uncommon, so when he tripped trying to flee, his first instinct was to bring his arms up to protect his face from being hit. But when nothing came, he looked up to see Ayame holding her hand out with a small dumpling on it. At the time, he had been kicked out of the orphanage almost 5 days ago. During that time he had been both overcharged and robbed. He was ravenous as he hadn't eaten in almost 3 days. Seeing food offered, he didn't question it. Naruto simply swiped it out of her hand and ran away before the simple generous act could turn into something more painful. The next day he was once more going through their trash bins. Only this time it was Tuchi Ojasan who was bringing trash out. When he spotted him, Naruto was preparing to run away again. Tuchi's voice stopped him as he asked, "Are you hungry?" It was a simple question, but it was the first time someone had openly acknowledged him. He didn't speak but did nod his head in response. Tuchi smiled when he spoke. "All right, come have a seat then. I'll whip up something for you." Walking in to sit on the stool, he was greeted again by Ayame who had introduced herself as such. She was very pretty in his opinion and looked a few years older than he was. Maybe by about 4 to 5 years. When asked for his order, he simply pointed to what he wanted. They initially were saddened when he informed them, more or less, by writing down that he was a mute. He never did fully explain his reasoning, but they still went ahead and welcomed him into their shop with smiles. It helped that he became their best customer as well, able to put down at least a dozen bowls of his favorite ramen. As he got closer to the ramen stand, the intoxicating aroma made its way into his nostrils, filling it with a heavenly scent that made his mouth water and his stomach grumble. His stomach might be grumbling more to the fact that he hadn't eaten more than a loaf of bread and 3 ramen cups all week. However today, he would make sure he had a full belly before going home. As he walked in, Ayame Nichan greeted him in her usual friendly manner that would have made him smile, except she immediately noticed his arm. "Welcome to Ichi Naruto-kun?" What happened? He had almost forgotten that he still had a sling on. Ayame came around the counter and started making a fuss over his well-being by looking him over for any other injuries she couldn't spot. Some people would find this awkward, yet Naruto didn't. It made him feel wanted. Tuchi was watching the scene, shaking his head slowly, already guessing what happened but voiced his suspicions anyway. "Naruto-kun, did they do that to you?" As he asked, he pointed outside towards the street, or more precisely the villagers. Naruto didn't talk, but the small nod of his head was his answer. Tuchi was fuming on the inside, but he did his best not to show it, instead tried to put on a reassuring smile. "Don't let them get to you, my boy. They're idiots who don't know the difference between the kunai and the scroll. For now, what will you be having? The usual, I presume?" Naruto looked up with a big smile and nodding his head vigorously. Both Tuchi and Ayame laughed at the young blonde's enthusiasm for ramen. Ayame patted the boy on his head with a kind smile, saying, "All right then, Naruto-kun, have a seat and I'll bring it right to you." Moving towards the stool, Naruto waiting patiently but with a huge smile that made him look about as adorable as any child should look without the problems he faced daily. Soon the first bowl came out. The smell and assortment of ingredients made his mouth water. As he went to reach for the chopsticks, he winced in pain as he remembered a slight problem that would make eating difficult. Looking down at his arm, frowned, thinking that eating with his left hand is going to be annoying to say the least. As he picked up the utensil, he heard Ayame Nichan speak up, "Welcome to Ichiraku's. Please have a seat wherever you like." Naruto heard a female's voice speak up behind him. To him, the voice sounded older but pleasant, like the person was strong but could be caring. Turning to the sound of the voice, Naruto saw what he thought was the prettiest woman he'd ever seen. She was blonde with a diamond mark on her forehead and a pair of big brown eyes. Next to her was another woman, not as pretty as the first maybe, but was still pretty regardless. She had black hair with a black kimono and a pig. The pig had on a maroon vest and wore white pearls around its neck. Naruto found that odd but didn't say anything, obviously. The blonde woman sat next to him while the black-haired woman sat on the other side of her. It looked like Tuchi Ojasan recognized them because he spoke with great enthusiasm as he bowed. "Tsunade-sama, welcome to my shop and welcome back to the village." He saw Ayame also bowed towards the blonde. Apparently, she was important, but he didn't know who she was exactly. So, instead of making a fuss, Naruto went back to trying to figure out how he was going to eat with his left hand. Tsunade waved her hand in a dismissive manner. "Please, you don't have to make a fuss over me. Me and Shizune here are just trying to get something to eat before heading back to the compound." Tuchi raised back up, smiling. "Thank you for choosing my humble ramen stand as your choice of what I can assume is your first meal back in Konoha." Shizune replied for them both. "Yes, we just got back a few hours ago. I had made a mention of this place to Tsunade-sama when we walked by. The food smelled delicious, so I figured it was worth mentioning." Chuki smiled at the compliment with his daughter speaking up for him. "Well, I can assure you that the meal will definitely be one to remember. I think our favorite customer might agree as well." As Ayame said that last part, she turned her head towards Naruto, who seemed to be having trouble with keeping a firm hold on the chopsticks. That wasn't stopping him, however, from wafting down the food as best as he could. Already on his second bowl, both Tsunade and Shizune looked surprised at how fast the little blonde boy could eat. When both women had received their orders of miso and shrimp ramen, Naruto was on his sixth bowl yet was having a harder time eating due to his right arm hurting from putting pressure on it. Tsunade watched the little gaki eat and figured out that he normally wasn't left-handed when it came to eating. It got her curious that if you forced yourself the struggle of using your non-dominate hand to eat this ramen, then it must be pretty good. After receiving her own bowl, Tsunade found that it was more than pretty good. The way the flavors mixed together made her feel warm inside, that put her in a better mood than what she had felt throughout the day of working. Looking at her apprentice, it appeared that she was having similar thoughts as well. Soon enough both she and Shizune had ordered 2 more bowls and had a satisfied look when they finished. To Tsunade and Shizune's surprise, the little blonde boy was on his 11th bowl but kept losing the ingredients off the chopsticks. Tsunade thought it was funny, but an elbow to the ribs made her look at Shizune, wondering what was the hit for. Shizune pointed to the little boy as she whispered, "Maybe you should help him, Tsunade-sama." Tsunade groaned at the prospect of helping this brat eat like she was his mother or something. Turning around to look at the child, who was now getting frustrated, which made him look adorable, Tsunade picked up the boy's ramen. It looked like he was about to have an aneurysm when she took the chopsticks away. That was until she had grabbed some of the noodles and held it out in front of him to take a bite. The boy looked at her confused, as if she grew a second head. "Oh, for Kami's sake, child, I'm helping you eat." The confusion seemed to stay as he looked towards Chuki and Ayame as if asking permission, much to her annoyance. When they nodded, he took a bite, but for some reason he looked guarded around her, almost as if he thought she was going to do something to him. After a few bites, he seemed to relax some but still seemed hesitant. Thinking of her younger days, Tsunade decided to play a game she used to play with her little brother. Taking some of the ingredients, she brought it up to his mouth. However, just before he took a bite, she pulled back and touched his nose with said ingredients. He pulled back, rubbing his nose, looking at her like she committed some form of blasphemy, while the others laughed at the scene. For her part, Tsunade had a mischievous smile on her face. She continued the game with either pinching his nose or cheeks with the chopsticks and poking him with the food across his face until he finally loosened up. He even had a smile on that reminded her so much of her little brother, Nawaki. On the last bite, the young blonde went to bite, but some of the sauce got on the side of his mouth. Almost like she was running on instinct, Tsunade placed the bowl down to lick her finger and wipe the sauce off before going back over it with a napkin. His eyes widened at the action, but they looked like saucers when she said, "There, little one, all better and handsome again." For the boy, it wasn't the words that took him by surprise, but the smile that the beautiful woman had. To him, she looked like a celestial being. Her smile made him feel so warm inside that he almost cried. To those around her, they could almost swear that Tsunade was simply taking care of her child. Tucci was familiar with the scene as he remembered his late wife doing something similar with Ayame when she was a child as well. Tsunade stood up with Shizune following suite and paid for the meal. Shizune saw that the little boy seemed to be mesmerized by her master. His bright blue eyes were filled with admiration that softened her heart at the sight. Tsunade looked towards Tucci before speaking. "Thank you for the meal, Tucci-san. It was by far the best ramen I've ever had." Tucci bowed with a smile. Then she looked at the little boy who still hadn't taken his eyes off her. "Now you run along home to your parents. I'm sure they're worried about you considering how late you've stayed out." She gave him a smile and patted his head before making her way out. Shizune was looking at the boy as the word parents seemed to change the spark he had in his eyes. Like what life was brought to them had just left. When her master left under the tarp, the little boy raised his hand slightly like he wanted to reach out to her, but at the last moment stopped himself. Shizune looked at Ayame-san and Tucci-san. Both had a saddened expression that was directed towards the little boy whose name they didn't get. Confused about what just happened, Shizune left the ramen shop to catch up with her master. If she would have stayed just a few moments longer, she would have seen the child cry silently as he paid for his meal. For Naruto, what he felt was something that he never had experienced before in his life. The blonde woman named Tsunade had showed him such kindness and even helped him eat when he couldn't. When she started playing with him, he felt lighter and was enjoying the meal even more. Yet that warm smile she showed him at the end put a feeling in his heart that he didn't recognize. He thought that if he had a mother, then she would be it. When she said that he should go back to his parents, he felt the familiar pain in his chest return. As she was walking away, he wanted to reach out to grab her, yet he didn't. He wished he had though. 2 months later, December 28th, Civilian Residential District, Konohagakure no Sato. It had been a couple of months since that night, and almost every evening Naruto went back to Ichiraku's hoping to see the beautiful blonde woman. Every day he went out, he kept a sharp eye for her or her companion. Yet by the end of every night he left disappointed. His more than frequent visits did not go unnoticed by Tucci Oja-san and Ayame Nichan. Both would watch him with sad expressions while trying to encourage him that he'd see her again. However, after so many weeks of being disappointed, he stopped looking. He supposed that it was silly of him to hope to see her and maybe spend more time with her. He could still see her smile when he thought of her. It made him wonder if she thought of him. She probably didn't, he guessed. He wasn't anything special, just a quiet little blonde boy with whisker marks that never spoke a word to her. Naruto found himself at the park, watching other kids his age play together in the snow that had fallen over the past few days. Many were laughing while making snow angels or packing snow together to make a snowman. He could see the parents of the different children talking and occasionally laughing at the sight. Those that looked in his direction sent hateful and disgusted looks. He hated those looks but in a sad way welcomed them. It was a form of acknowledgement in his mind. The parents had to notice he was there to hate him. It was a sad way of thinking but he had nothing else. The only thing positive to happen to him was he might have made a friend. It was the same girl who he had protected from a bunch of older kids. Although they did use him as a punching bag instead and destroyed his red scarf, they completely left her alone. The girl was very cute with dark blue hair and pupil-less lavender-colored eyes. Today he got to see her in the park with a woman he assumed was her mother because of how similar they looked minus the years apart. He acknowledged that when the little girl slightly younger than him grew up, she would probably be just as pretty as her mother. Earlier he was trying to make a snowman by himself but he couldn't do it so just decided to make snowballs. It was then that she showed up and offered to play with him. He was so excited that he felt like he was going to get a muscle cramp from the smile he had on his face. They played for an hour of simply building small snowmen, hitting each other with snowballs, and just sitting down to talk. Well, she talked and he replied with shakes of his head or nodding. Yet when it was getting late, her mother told her that it was time to go. The little girl was about to leave until she asked him what his name was. Sticking to his nonverbal communication, Naruto wrote out his name in the snow. She looked down and sounded out his name, then looked at him with a smile. It was nice meeting you, Uzumaki-san. I hope we get to see each other again. Naruto smiled at her while nodding his head quite enthusiastically. Once she left though, the parents who were still there sent hateful glares if he so much as took a step towards the other children. He wanted to just go and play with them, not eat them. It didn't matter though. They wanted their children to have nothing to do with him. Finally, everyone was emptying the park. Sons and daughters were leaving hand in hand with their mothers or fathers or both in some cases. Watching them leave, he couldn't help feeling envious. For a moment, he saw himself with a certain beautiful blonde woman with a diamond on her forehead walking hand in hand. He had to stop thinking about that. It was never going to happen. On his way back to his run-down apartment, he was mentally kicking himself for getting his hopes up. No one else in the village wanted him, so why would things be any different? Deep in his own thoughts, he didn't notice the group of men following him towards an alley he took to his home. They made their presence known when one of them roughly grabbed him and threw him towards a wall. He could have sworn he felt something break. Again. Tears were already falling from his eyes as he knew what they were planning on doing. He hated being their tool. He recognized some of the men as the usual ones that liked to rape him. As he tried to get up they started kicking him. When one kicked his head, he blacked out. The next moments were blurs between feeling pain in his throat and rectum to feeling pain from the bruises and cuts that were started to show. He wished for them to stop. He wished for it all to stop. Everything. Every pain he felt from being hurt, every ache he felt from being lonely. He just wanted it to end, and it did when he felt himself being placed against the wall and several kunai being stabbed into his ankles and hands. The worst though was when one of them took a pair of shuriken and stabbed his eyes out. He felt a hand clamp over his mouth when he screamed. His body was convulsing from the amount of pain it was in. They decided to add another kunai into his abdomen. It was buried so deep he could almost feel the tip against his spine. They were done. He was grateful for it too. He wanted it to end and now it did. He wished he could have met the nice lady one more time. He wished for a lot of things. A good home, nice friends, a loving family. Fate decided however that it simply wasn't meant to be. Right now, all he had was the pain he felt from his wounds, the coldness from the air flowing along his body that was exposed to the elements, and lastly the silence that came from being alone. December 29th, Konohagakure General Hospital, the next morning. Releasing another yawn, Tsunade was on her way to her office at Konoha's General Hospital to start another day of being the head of medicine for the hospital. Tsunade loved her job and loved helping people, yet, if there was one thing she did not like about her new position, it would be the paperwork relating to the staff, budget, inventory, and of course the patients. She always hated paperwork but knew the importance of keeping accountability of their patients, especially those with special cases. Reflecting on the past 2 months, Tsunade was thinking that if returning to the village would have been this much of a hassle then she would have remained on her self-exile trip. Between the hospital and the council, she could feel her age creeping up on her from the amount of bullshit she received. It didn't help that the past 2 months had cut into her hobbies, drinking assorted sakes and gambling. The council was by far the worst part of returning to the village. Not only has the civilian side of the council trying to derail some of the changes she's been suggesting on the healthcare for the village, the advisors for Sarutobi-sensei have repeatedly went out of their way to justify placing her under the Clan Restoration Act. Their reasoning always seemed to be the same except with different words each time. Yes, she could still have children. Yes, it would continue her family's lineage and there was a chance for her grandfather's Mokuden would release blood limit to pass on to her children. Yet those felt like the wrong reason to have children as well as she had no intention of being a simple baby-making factory that allowed random men to basically rape her to get her pregnant. Besides, she felt that after her last attempt to have children, she didn't deserve that honor. So now every time the subject came up during the meetings, she would simply shoot a glare with a promise saying she would physically castrate whoever suggests the CRA to her and hang them by their own reproductive organs. Whether they dangle between their legs or bleed every 28 days, if the latter was the case, then she would just rip them out. She is a doctor after all, she can successfully do it and give a prescription for pain meds later. Even if some like that Hagkaharu had ovaries like dried prunes. Tsunade shivered at the reminder of that woman's last physical. As she was making her way into the hospital, Tsunade noticed that there was an oppressive feeling in the air. She recognized it immediately as killer intent. Normally, killer intent couldn't be felt in a general area, unless that person was both experienced and able to extend their killer intent beyond their intended target. When she made eye contact with Shizune, looking a bit frazzled, said woman quickly ran up to her. Tsunade-sama. Thank Kami-sama that you're here. Please follow me. Quickly. Confused, Tsunade could only nod as she was quite literally dragged by her apprentice. What is going on, Shizune? Why are we in such a rush? The issue made itself known in the form of female shouting and what sounded like glass cracking. What the fuck do you mean? You won't fucking help him? A second voice belonging to a male could now be heard, not as loudly but just as heated. It's exactly as I said. I refuse to help that thing. Besides, you have already provided more aid than what we are required to do. So now I'm going to write up the discharge paperwork to get it out of this hospital. Rounding the corner of the hallway, Tsunade saw the shouting duo. The man was one of the older doctors, a well-respected man in the field of high-risk medical care such as heart and brain surgeries. The woman, who now was holding the doctor by his collar and pressed against the wall, had black hair with a violet tint styled in a short, spiky, fanned ponytail. She was wearing a fitted mesh bodysuit that covered her from her neck past her well-shaped bust down to her thighs. The woman wore a tan overcoat with pockets on each side, along with a dark orange mini skirt, a dark blue belt, and pale gray shin guards to complete her outfit. Tsunade spoke up, catching the attention of both people arguing. Shizune. What is this, he's referring to? Tsunade asked her apprentice as they made their way towards the two aggressive parties. For her part, Shizune was just as confused. I'm not sure, Tsunade-sama. When I arrived for my shift they had just started arguing. I asked around but it seems no one is sure what is the issue or they simply walk away. The woman looked at the two of them. The anger her light brown eyes held left no doubt that this woman was pissed and ready to throttle the poor fool. The issue, she emphasized with her fingers, is that this fucking piece of no good dog shit doctor is refusing to help a patient. Not in the best mood for this kind of drama in the morning, Tsunade held her hand up in a calming manner. Alright, hold on. First off, who are you? Secondly, who is the patient? Third, why is treatment being refused? The woman pointed to herself with her thumb and a confident grin answered, well, for your first question, Jiggles-sama, my name's Mitarashi Anko. I work at the T&I department with Ibiki in case you ever need to find me. Second answer, the patient is a child. And third answer, this guy won't help because he sucks fat penis. Tsunade raised an eyebrow at Anko's rough language and responses while Shizune blushed a bit at the reference made to the man. Looking at the doctor, who was turning red from the insult, Tsunade asked, alright, so what's your reason for not wanting to help, a child no less? The man regained his composure before speaking. Tsunade-sama, please understand that my services are not required. The boy simply suffered a small flesh wound. What came next surprised Tsunade and Shizune as Anko delivered a strong left hook to the side of his jaw. Shizune moved towards the doctor who was now on the floor holding his face while Tsunade was holding back Anko. Hey! Enough! Mitarashi-san, what the hell was that? Pointing to the doctor, the anger Anko held was back full fury. That son of a bitch is lying to you. Flesh wound, my sweet-toned ass. That boy was stabbed over a dozen times in a dozen all over his body. That sure as hell surprised Tsunade and Shizune, who were now paying very close attention to Anko. Shizune's eyes were wide as saucers as she breathlessly asked, what do you mean he was stabbed over a dozen times? Anko looked to her, disgust and pity were coating her words, it's exactly as I said. That boy had at least a dozen stab wounds, with the most obvious ones being on his hands, ankles, eyes, and chest. Tsunade's mouth was wide open. She's seen and heard of many injuries, yet from the description Anko just made, those wounds were nothing short of murder, or in this case attempted murder. That the child was even alive was a miracle in itself. Mishirashi-san, please explain to me, from the beginning, what you saw? Tsunade asked with steel in her voice, leaving no room for disagreement. Anko, however, was all too willing to inform the Slug Princess. Flashback. 3 hours ago, civilian residential district, Konohagakure. Anko was on her way to her favorite dango shop with a skip in her step and whistling an upbeat tune. Today she would get to crack some poor sap about a smuggling line within the Fire Country's borders. Deciding to take a shortcut, Anko cut through one of the residential alleyways, hoping to save a few minutes to get to her daily fix of sweetie goodness. Eyes closed and a smile across her lips, she could feel her mouth already watering at the thought of the flavor. Imagining the smell, Anko decided to take in a deep breath, yet what infiltrated her nose was nothing sweet. It was foul to the point that it made her eyes widen and gag. "What the fuck?" she said, coughing at the loss of air from her lungs. Getting her bearings back under her, Anko takes another sniff of the air. It smelled familiar to her, cause it was. She works around it almost daily when she's with a guest at torture and interrogation department. Blood. There was no mistaking the smell of old blood. Looking around further into the alley, she starts noticing a trail of blood drops on the snow from yesterday. Eyes narrowed for the slightest hint at movement and a kunai in hand that she brought out from her overcoat, Anko followed the blood to the source. When she spotted it, her eyes widened at the scene before her. She could almost swear that she's seen this before in a murder film she saw once. Something about a man being crucified and left as a warning. However, the scene before her was not of a man, but of a boy with sun-kissed yellow hair. Blood had completely soaked the ground below him and spread along the wall he was nailed to. 3 kunai held him in place at his hands and ankles. His clothes were torn and shredded, laying in pieces around him. His body was covered in bruises, bodily fluids, and stab wounds. The most prominent of them being the kunai still embedded into his abdomen. That was until she saw the 2 shuriken gauging his eyes. Anko just stared at the boy, she didn't know what else to do. The boy didn't look no older than 5. She could feel moisture run down her cheeks, realizing that she was crying. It seemed to snap her out of her stupor, as Anko proceeded to make a shadow clone to help pull the boy down. Now cradling the boy in her arms, she finally figured out who it was. The village pariah, Uzumaki Naruto. The boy who held the Kyuubi no Kitsune at bay inside his body. Her tears continued to fall on the boy's face, running along one of the whisker marks on his cheek. Anko saw that there was ice on his cheeks. He must have been crying the entire time it happened. For fuck's sake, how can they? He's only a fucking child, for Cammy's sake. Placing 2 fingers along the pulse point on his neck, she can't help but notice how much like ice his skin feels. As she presses down on the artery below his skin, her eyes widen. Anko looks down at the boy, who is somehow still alive after all he endured. With determination on her features, Anko proceeded to help the boy as best as she could before taking him to the hospital. Present time, Konoha General Hospital, Konohagakure. Once I did what I could, which wasn't much. I brought him here. Had to threaten a few of the ICU staff to take him. They gave the same bullshit this old fuck gave about not wanting to help it. Anko said, finishing up her story. Both women looked horrified at what they just heard. Yet Anko wasn't done. From what I overheard, he received several cracked ribs, his hands will be completely useless for a while, he received a strong hit to the noggin, so they were not sure of what his head is like. Eyesight is gone, and finally, the sugarcoat for all this. Minus the small degree of frostbite he received. His throat and rectum have severe scar tearing. It doesn't take a genius to guess he was raped multiple times before they stuck him like he was a fucking animal. Tsunade was clenching her fists so hard they were starting to bleed. Shizune was starting to feel physically sick at the mention of what the boy had gone through. Tsunade looked down at the doctor, her killer intent full force aimed at the man. "Get out of my sight. Anko, can you show me his room?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it held no warmth at all. Anko nodded, terrified what the Slug Princess would do if she said no. With Anko leading the way, the trio of women soon found a door guarded by an Anbu. As if hearing the question the 2 other women were wondering, Anko spoke up. "I sent a message to the Hokage letting him know of the situation. He sent Neko, cat, to watch over his room, and Inu, dog, should be inside watching over him. They're the 2 that the old man trusts most with guarding him." Shizune looked at the female Anbu confused. "Excuse me, but why does the boy need this kind of protection in the hospital?" Tsunade was wondering the same, until a light bulb went off in her head. "Mitarashi-san, has there been any form of aggression from the staff here?" It was Naoko who answered the Sanin's question. There have been multiple incidents where the staff has acted in an aggressive manner. Some even to the extent of attempted murder. That was a major nerve ending for Tsunade. Shizune. Compile a list of all the staff who have shown repeated offenses towards this child. If any of those on said list are still a part of the staff, I want to know. Now. Shizune bowed quickly and ran off saying, "Hi Tsunade-sama." Finally having enough, Tsunade walked past Naoko to finally check on the health of the boy who became a victim. When she walked in, she noticed three things. The first was the second Anbu guard with silver hair wearing an Inu mask. The second was the boy currently in a fetal position shaking with his back facing her. Finally, what she noticed the most was the boy's sun-kissed yellow hair. Yellow hair wasn't exactly uncommon within the village, but his sun-kissed hair was brighter than most everybody's. When Anko told the events of her story, she failed to mention any description of the boy as well as a name. Tsunade never got the name of the boy, but she did remember him slightly from the night she helped feed him ramen. Inu looked towards the two of them, nodding his head slightly in acknowledgement. Tsunade walked around to see his face while looking at the different bandages wrapped around his body from the places she could see. As she walked around to his face, she could see him crying. Despite this, the boy still made no sounds. Not a sob nor a whimper. That was an issue she would have to bring up to her sensei later. She went to touch him to run a diagnostic using her medical jutsu, the Mystic Palm, when Inu yelled and tried to reach out to her, "No, don't." His words came too late, as once Tsunade's hand made contact with the boy, he reacted like he just got burned. His head snapped up, fear the most prominent emotion on his body language, and scrambled away from the thing that touched him. Everyone was surprised by how volatile the boy reacted to being touched. During their shock, the boy continued to scramble away towards the door, which had still been opened. "Shit. Catch him, he'll injure himself more if we don't." Inu called out as he made to grab the little blonde currently leaving the room. He tried to grab him, however he managed to slip between Anko and Tsunade, who he ended up tackling both. Naoko tried her hand at catching the boy. He slipped between her legs and bolted for the open window in the hallway. Naoko and Inu cursed under their breath at their inability to watch the one they were supposed to take care of. "Naoko, move," Inu called out, heading for the window as well. Anko and Tsunade had managed to pick themselves up and followed in the pursuit as well. Even with all four of them chasing the boy, his size coupled with his frantic behavior, they lost sight of him. Anko was the first to voice the frustration they all felt. "Okay, I understand how myself and Jiggles-sama didn't catch him, but how the fucking hell did he slip past you two? The kid is blind now for Kami's sake," she emphasized her question by pointing at the two Anbu. Naoko shook her head in disappointment. "He has always had a way of avoiding his pursers. We still don't know how he manages to enter and exit HQ without anybody noticing." Bringing them back on track, Inu spoke up. "As for his eyesight, it doesn't matter. Over the course of guarding him, I've noticed that his senses overall are heightened like an Inuzuka. Regardless of how we lost him, we need to find him. He'll most likely try to find some place dark and not overly populated. Let's split up." "Wait." Tsunade held her hand up, stopping the two Anbu from departing. "Inu, you knew what was going to happen when I tried to touch him," receiving a nod in reply. "Okay, what I want to know is why did that happen?" From the way his shoulders slumped, Tsunade guessed it has happened before, which Inu confirmed. "This is not the first time he's acted like this, Tsunade-sama. To my knowledge, he has ever received any form of human contact that wasn't aggressive." Anko spoke up next, already guessing what he was going to say. "So basically the Gaki turned feral and his flight instincts took over after he was already injured?" Inu simply nodded. After that, the two Anbu left together to continue their search, leaving the two other women by themselves. Releasing a sigh, Tsunade had a thought that might prove fruitful. "Mitarashi-san, do you know where he lives?" Clearly Anko wasn't expecting a question like that, as her response was, yeah, why?" Tsunade nodded before explaining. "Good. Lead the way to where he lives. I have a hunch that if he's acting on instinct, his body is going to want to go someplace familiar, not just dark and secluded. Even if he can't see, as Inu pointed out, his senses will guide him to wherever that may be familiar but might not mean safe." Anko finally understood what she was getting at as she nodded and proceeded to jump in the direction of the residential district. At the speed they were going, they had quickly arrived at a worn-down apartment complex. The room was on the top of the building, with the outer walls of the complex showing signs of abuse. There was painted words written all over the outside stating things such as monster, demon, and murderer. Tsunade was perplexed at all this. Clearly the boy was not liked in the slightest. But to receive attacks to his property as well as his body, she was having trouble thinking of a reason. Walking up and grabbing a hold of the doorknob, she was surprised to find it unlocked. When she pushed the door open, she saw that it wasn't a case of being unlocked but rather a case of the door being broken. Stepping inside, she looked at the state of the apartment and remembered seeing something similar in the poorer families she saw on her travels. Leaking roofs, broken walls and flooring, heat was non-existent and the place was a mess. She saw empty cups of instant ramen and dishes stacked in the sink, or what could be counted as dishes. They looked more like old broken and cracked pieces of pottery. Walking further in, she could see an abundance of trash on the floors along with dirty, ripped clothing. By the window, she saw a worn banner that was missing a few letters hung loosely by one end that was supposed to read, "Happy Birthday." Yet despite the state of the apartment, it was the smell that took her aback. Tsunade was expecting something foul or rotting. Instead she smelled something sweet and surprisingly pleasant. She looked to her right and noticed an assortment of different plants and flowers ranging from vanilla and lavender to daisies and honeysuckles. The same could be seen on the window sills with a few peace lilies. Enko walked up next to her voicing out, so that was what he was doing at the flower shop. Enko caught Tsunade's questioning stare out of the corner of her eye before elaborating. When I visited the Yamanaka flower shop, I had saw him leaving with what looked like seed packages. I didn't pay it any mind since I didn't think he would be able to grow them. I mean, what little brat takes an interest in gardening? Looking around again at the plants that were alive and well taken care of, she sighed, shows what I know, right? Looking around the apartment some more, Tsunade saw another door leading to where she thought was the bedroom. As quietly as she could, she approached the door, noticing small blood drops leading towards it. Only her concern for the boy was keeping her hemophobia at bay, otherwise she'd be a shaking and muttering mess. When the door was slowly and quietly pushed open, both women looked inside. It seemed Tsunade's suspicion proved fruitful indeed, for there, on an old mattress, was the boy. At the moment, he had his back facing them and bunched up as close to the wall as possible, almost like he was seeking some matter of comfort from it. He was shaking and Tsunade could see his hands holding himself. They were patting and stroking his arms almost as if. Tsunade felt like she just had the wind knocked out of her as she realized what the boy was doing. As a medic, she had seen many things and picked up on the behaviors of patients. The most common thing between patients was vocal communication. Every human being has an instinct to let people know when they are hurt or in need of help. It was something instilled when people were children, to let their parents know that they needed them. Yet try as hardest as she could not hear a single sound from the boy. This boy, who was consoling himself, didn't make a sound because he grew up without the help from others. Tsunade looked around again, looking for any pictures of parents or guardians. There were none, of course, only reinforcing her theory that this boy was silent because in his mind, help would never come to him even if he did make a sound. She could feel her heart and soul reach out to the boy. Every instinct she had told her to run to him, grab him in a hug, and never let him go. And so, she did. She quickly made her way to the boy to grab him. Once again, when she touched him, the boy reacted violently, doing everything in his power to escape from her grasp. She tried shushing to calm him down, but he was so traumatized by a person's touch that he didn't understand what was happening. Thinking about what else she could do, she remembered a lullaby her mother used to sing to her and her younger brother Naoki. Seeing no harm in trying, she, in as calming as possible, started to sing. Deep in the meadow, under the willow, a bed of grass, a soft green pillow. Lay down your head, and close your eyes, and when they open, the sun will rise. Here it's safe, here it's warm. Here the daisies guard you from every harm. Here your dreams are sweet, and tomorrow brings them true. Here is the place, where I love you. When she started singing, the boy, still trying to escape, calmed down some. Enough to understand that the person holding him wasn't hurting him. Tsunade was looking down at his face while she sang, noticing the effect her firm but gentle hold had on the boy. He had his arms up shielding his face, only his eyes still wrapped in bandages. His body was trembling terribly from the foreign concept of being held in a non-aggressive manner. As she got towards the end of the lullaby, the boy had brought his hands down, his trembling had slowed down to small shakes. The boy's face never left the direction of her singing. It seemed he was falling asleep with the gentle rocking and the song, as he tried to snuggle into her bosom for warmth while his breathing was slowing down to shallow breaths. By now she had finished singing and was just humming the tune. Looking down at the bandages that were splotched red and smearing on her blouse, Tsunade had to force herself to not freak out or shake. This boy needed her and she would help him, hemophobia be damned. Activating her mystic palm technique, she went to work on healing his body. The boy would be sore, but he would stop bleeding and would live. After roughly 17 minutes of healing, she was done. The boy had fallen asleep in her arms with his head resting atop of her breast. He looked so peaceful, you'd never know that he was a traumatized child. Tears had welled up and begun falling on his whiskered cheeks. Leaning down, she placed a kiss atop his forehead. Anko was standing next to her watching the whole scene. She had been crying since Tsunade started singing. Anko prided herself in being a hard woman who could take a lot of what was handed to her. Yet the sight of someone who, like her, was ostracized by their home, endured much worse, brought her to tears. She swore then and there that she would do everything she could to protect this little boy. An oath that was mirrored in the mind of the woman currently holding him. Anko, Tsunade spoke up, gaining the snake charmer's attention. Can you please inform the Hokage that I'm taking this boy to my compound? I'm going to look after him until he's fully healed. Anko wordlessly wiped her eyes before shining towards the Hokage's office. It didn't take Tsunade more than 30 minutes to get to her clan compound. On the way to her home, she had noticed the stares directed her way, or more specifically the child in her arms. Almost all of them were looks of hatred or disgust. Many mothers with their children would usher them to the other side of the street just to get away from her charge. By the time she was halfway home, she was tempted to kill half the population of Konoha. Being the Senju clan compound, the size itself was impressive compared to other compounds. The walls surrounding the property were a special type of chakra-infused wood that her grandfather created with his Mokuton. This made the walls as durable as steel and able to regenerate if damaged. It was the same type of wall that currently surrounded the village and its gates. Walking in through the gate towards the mansion, a 3-story thatched roof building made from the same chakra-infused wood as the walls, with balconies on the 2nd and 3rd floors. The 1st floor was elevated slightly off the ground with 2 fusuma, sliding doors, facing towards the front gate. The slightly curved eaves of the roofs extended far beyond the walls to cover the verandas surrounding the building on each story. In Tsunade's opinion, the mansion was a bit excessive. Back when she was a small girl, the compound was filled with people of all ages. Now it was just occupied by herself and Shizune. At times, it felt too empty for her liking. She often wondered if her own failed legacy would have loved it here. Yet that was a useless thought trail to go down. Making her way inside into a rather modernized living room with plastered walls and soft furniture, a stark contrast compared to the outside look of her home, Tsunade made her way towards the stairs leading to the 2nd floor, where many of the bedrooms including her own were located on. Shizune had stayed back at the hospital to continue her shift for a few hours before returning home. Entering a furnished bedroom for guests that she never had, Tsunade went to lay the boy down to better check some of the wounds he still had. Yet when she tried to let go, the boy seemed to cling tighter to her coat. For another reason, he also had on a stupid-looking smile on his face as he snuggled closer to her breasts. If he was older, she'd have guessed he was a pervert who just wanted to have his face between her cleavage, in which case she'd send him flying through a window. Trying once more, she had succeeded releasing herself from her ward's clutches. Very carefully she removed the bandages around his eyes to see what the damage was. What surprised her was, instead of looking at ruined eye sockets, there wasn't a scratch on them. She decided to ask her sensei about this later. Taking a closer look at his sleeping face, Tsunade couldn't help but stroke his whisker-marked cheeks. He looked so innocent and adorable, actually. Not that she'd say it out loud, she did have an image to maintain. Deep down she loved children and wished she had one of her own. Seeing the boy move slightly brought her out of her thoughts as he took in a deep breath before slowly exhaling, his eyes fluttering open to look at her once more, surprising her that they were there to begin with. Tsunade had to admit that his eyes were like deep blue oceans. He's going to be a real head-turner for the ladies when he grows up. It must have registered with the boy that he was with a stranger. His eyes went from confusion to fear as he backed away, falling off the bed in the process. Tsunade went to check on him, but he pushed himself back further away from her into a corner. He was shaking, his eyes never taking her out of his sight. When she was in front of him kneeling, he brought his arms up to protect himself. He must think I'm going to hurt him. Has this been everything he's known? She thought as Tsunade placed her hand, glowing with her mystic palm, on top of his own and smiled as best as she could. To the boy, the sensation from the technique was warm and soothing. It was something he never felt before, and it was so comforting that he just had to peek at the woman to see what she was doing. To his utmost surprise, she was smiling at him. This smile wasn't something forced or hiding something sinister. He'd seen quite a few of those to recognize the difference. The smile reminded him of something he saw at the park. It was the same smile that Hinata's mother had on her face when she walked up to her. A mother's smile. He'd seen some of the other mothers give the same look and smile to their own children. Every time he would think of how lucky they were and always envied them for it. Yet now, kneeling in front of him was the same beautiful blonde woman he met a few months before. Giving him the same smile he always yearned for, always hoped for, and never thought he'd receive. The woman moved her hand from his own hand to other areas where his bandages hurt the most. The pain would quickly recede to a small annoyance after she was done with the area. He never took his eyes off her face, not when she continued healing him until she was done, nor until she looked at him again while patting his head affectionately. "There. All done, little one," she said to him in a soft voice that made his insides heat up. A knock on the front door alerted Tsunade that someone was here. She wasn't expecting anybody, so it did make her curious as to who could it be. Looking towards the boy, she said, "I'll be back, just let me check who's at the door." Standing up, Tsunade made to leave the room, yet she felt a tug on her pant leg along with a pair of hands that seemed to latch onto her. Looking down, the boy was currently latched onto her leg, shaking, almost like he was afraid. She couldn't understand it, so decided to ask, "Excuse me, but can you please let go so I—" The words trailed off as he simply shook his head, burying his face into her pant leg. Sighing in defeat, Tsunade simply said, "All right, Gaki, come along." As much as she liked children, the clinginess was still new to her. Walking down with the boy still clingy and hiding behind her, Tsunade reached the front door, opening it to see Anko with her sensei. The man looked at her in a serious manner before looking down at her, the boy currently hiding behind her leg. Her sensei's face softened with a smile as he greeted the boy. "Hello, Naruto-kun. I'm glad that you're in safe hands." Turning his gaze back to her, he asked, "May we come in? I would like to speak to you about an important matter." Tsunade sat in her living room with Naruto sitting between herself and Anko. Across from her was her sensei, who was staring back at her. His features looked neutral, but if she had to guess what he was feeling, it was nervousness. The room was silent save for the drip from her faucet in the kitchen. Yet even that was uncomfortable, since it only reinforced the growing irritation Tsunade was feeling towards her sensei. The glasses of water and dango sitting on the table in front of them did nothing to help the loving home atmosphere. It didn't appear to affect Anko though, as she was eating the dango while sharing with Naruto, who seemed to be loving the sweets as much as the snake mistress did. Clearing her throat, she spoke up, "Sensei, let me make sure I understand what you're saying. You want me to hand over Naruto," patting his head to emphasize said boy, "to you, so you can take him back to his apartment. Correct?" She could just make out the way her sensei tensed up as he replied, "That's core?" Tsunade cut him off, however, not really wanting to hear her sensei's reply. "You have got to be kidding me. It's already ridiculous that you, the Hokage, can't or won't punish the ones responsible for an attack that is punishable by death. All because a bunch of stuck-up civilians in expensive clothing who call themselves counselors would get pissed off." The three other people in the room recoiled as each word she spoke were so frigid one could almost swear they could see ice starting to form. Anko herself felt a bit frightened, enough so that she wrapped an arm around Naruto in a protective manner. She didn't need to, of course, but from the way the older blonde was speaking and the steely look in her eyes, she wouldn't be surprised if the Hokage was suddenly and violently kicked out of the house. Said Hokage was thinking the same thing, feeling cold beads of sweat run down the back of his neck as his student glared at him. Clearing his throat, he spoke up once more, "Look, Tsunade, I know this may seem wrong, but believe me when I say my hands are being tied down by the civilian council. The most I can do is throw the ones who did this in jail for a short time. Without the full council's vote, I cannot condemn these men no matter how much I might want to." Both Tsunade and Anko perked up at this information, catching the underlying message the Hokage may or may not have intentionally let slip. Anko asked, "Wait, so you already know who attacked Naruto?" Hiruzen realized that he just added fuel to the fire already burning in the women currently sitting in front of him. If they found out who the perpetrators were, both would go hunting for them. He had little doubt that they would succeed. Yet he had to outweigh the safety for the village over the safety of one, as much as he hated it. "Yes, I was made aware of it shortly before coming here. However, I will not be making their names known. I know you both and I know you will seek vengeance however right it is." Anko stood up abruptly after letting go of Naruto to yell at her boss, "Are you fucking kidding me? You're telling us that Naruto gets raped and crucified and you won't do a damn thing?" Hiruzen didn't like the tone one of his kunoichi was taking up with him and quickly rose to stare his subordinate down. "Mitarashi-san, I suggest you remember who you are talking to and rein your anger back." The room suddenly grew oppressive as Tsunade let her killer intent loose on her sensei, her voice hard as she said, "Sensei, you have two options. First, you call your Anbu to arrest the individuals so that Anko and Ibiki can question them. Once either of them gets the verbal confession, which I have no doubt they will, you will hold a public execution in which I will personally act as the executioner. If someone else wants to participate, then they can." Hiruzen narrowed his eyes at his student, not liking where the second option was going, but voiced, "Or." One could almost see the chakra glow around Tsunade as her reply was, "Or I cut path through this village looking for them. Make no mistake, old man, I will kill them. Whether that is with your help or not is up to you." Hiruzen could see his student was serious and he would be hard-pressed stopping her. With a heavy sigh, he sent out a pulse to 4 of his Anbu captains. Within seconds, kneeling before him were 3 men and a woman he trusted most for his protection. Looking down at them, he ordered, "You all know who I'm looking for. You are to find and arrest the men responsible for the assault of Uzumaki Naruto. Once detained, they are to be sent for a session at the T&I department with Morino Ibiki and Mitarashi Anko." "Hi." They all responded, then just as quickly disappeared to perform their tasks. Feeling a headache coming on, Hiruzen rubbed his temples after sitting back down. You realize that the civilian council won't be too thrilled about this. They'll fight to make sure those men aren't. Once again he was silenced by his student as she spoke over him with determination and steel. "Sensei, I can honestly give 2 shits about what those cocky fat bureaucrats think. They can throw every kind of argument about why whoever did this shouldn't be killed, but the facts are they committed a crime that is just plain barbaric and nothing short of an atrocity." It looked like her sensei needed more convincing as he argued back, "I understand, but we can't simply ignore the council should they try to protest this. In the years you've been gone, they have gained more power among the local businesses and trade. Often, I remind them that this is a shinobi village and all final matters fall to my decision. They have only gotten worse with the Yondaimi's death." Tsunade just looked at him with an impassive stare. She heard and understood what her sensei was saying, but she didn't give a flying fuck what the civilian council thought about the matter. She was going to make sure that those responsible were punished and she would be the one to carry out the sentence. "Fine, Sensei, however, just to make things clear, I will be adopting this boy. He will obviously be staying here with me in Shizune where we will provide for him. I will not take, no I cannot adopt him, as a suitable answer and I will be bringing this matter up before the council. Should any of th. She didn't get to finish what she was going to say as suddenly said boy had his arms wrapped around her neck in an almost suffocating hug. Not exactly a comforting embrace as his knee was digging into her ribs, nevertheless she wrapped her arms around him. Those around her seemed to relax at the sight of the 2 blondes, both who had experienced hardships but looked like things might turn out for the better. Any argument he had concerning Tsunade's qualification simply died in his head as he could see young Naruto had already shown he was more than okay with this. However, before anything more could be said, he had to explain one thing. The rest could wait for later. "Well, Tsunade-heim, it seems that Naruto agrees with you on this. Yet before I can just simply say yes, there is something you should know about the boy." Both had turned their attention to him as he stood up to walk to the now mother and son. Placing his hand atop of Naruto's head, he brought his other hand up making a sign before saying, "Kai." The 2 women both looked confused at why he was doing this when suddenly Naruto went up into a puff of smoke. Tsunade and Enko stared at the smoke looking at Naruto, but when it started disappearing, both had shocked open-mouthed expressions. Naruto was still kneeling next to Tsunade, only now he was sporting some very different physical features. The top of his head were blonde pointed ears with black tips on the ends. An "eep" came out of Anko, drawing everyone's attention. When Naruto turned with his ears twitching slightly, Tsunade saw a small little puff of fur just at the base of his spine. Is that a tail?" she thought as Anko let out another "eep." Turning her attention back to the snake mistress, she saw that Anko was visibly struggling in her seat, like she was holding herself back for some odd reason. Finally needing to know, she asked, "Anko, what's wrong?" She got her answer quickly as Anko squealed like a schoolgirl and yanked Naruto to her. He is so cute. Too cute even. Oh Kami, these ears. And this tail." She paused for a second, pulling the boy back to look at him before, As she spoke, she went from touching Naruto's ears, then his tail, then back to his ears. The boy couldn't exactly protest as currently his face was being pushed between her generous breast while his arms were flailing. Tsunade didn't help him out due to her growing curiosity, trying to guess why he had a tail and ears like that, while Hiruzen simply watched one of his kunoichi revert to the mentality of a teenager. Finally, Anko had calmed down enough to place the disheveled-looking Naruto in her lap facing away from her. The boy sported an exasperated look as an even more cheerful Anko had taken to petting his head and ears like he was a dog, or in this case, "Sensei, are those fox ears?" Tsunade asked incredulously. She'd seen many things while away from the village, but not someone who possessed something like this. Hiruzen turned back to sit once more. Taking his place, he cleared his throat before speaking. "Yes, they are, Tsunade, but before I can tell you why they're there I need to ask Anko to take Naruto-kun out for a bit." Both Anko and Naruto perked up at this. Naruto because he might be able to find out why the villagers hate him, and Anko since she felt that Naruto had a right to hear about his tenant, if that was why they were being dismissed. Besides, she was content to just sit there petting her new favorite fox. Yet the decision was taken away from her as Jiggles spoke up. "No. Sorry Sensei, but whatever you tell me when he is not around, I'm going to tell Naruto when you leave." He's already had enough done to him, he doesn't need his new mother keeping secrets from him too. Hiruzen sighed, already guessing that was going to happen. Though inwardly, he was glad. Tsunade was right, Naruto did indeed go through a lot, and a home without secrets was a good thing. Naruto just continued looking at Tsunade, or his mother now, with even more admiration. His mother, he had a mother now. A good one too if he compared her to some of the other mothers he's seen. She was kind, had a heartwarming smile, and was very, very pretty. So, struggling out of the weird but nice woman's arms, he crawled over to sit in his new mother's lap. He heard the weird lady whine as he moved out of her lap, but it was fine by him. He could have sworn he felt her touch his tail, which only made him move away from her faster. Tsunade watched as her new son made himself comfortable on her lap by wrapping one of her hands and hugging it to himself. He looked up at her with a smile that easily melted her heart and explained why Anko had freaked out. She couldn't help but think, "You're going to be a real lady killer when you grow up, Naruto." Smiling back at him, she patted his head before giving her sensei her full attention again. Hiruzen smiled at the two, but his smile dropped behind his hat as he decided to begin his tale. "Very well, Tsunade Heim. Now before I begin, know that this is a village S-rank secret that, should it be mentioned, is punishable by death." He got a nod in response at this, so continued on. "Well, first and foremost, the reason why the villagers hate Naruto and continue to make his life a living hell is simply because they don't understand. The villagers were told and are still being told that when the Yondaime faced the Kyuubi no Kitsune, he sacrificed his life to kill it. However, that was not the case. The Kyuubi, well, really all biju-tailed beast, in general, can't simply be killed as they are beings made of entirely by chakra. There is still much we don't know about the biju, but the common thing is they cannot be killed and have enough destructive force to level nations. So, since the Yondaime couldn't kill the beast, he used a technique known as Fuinjutsu, Shiki Fujin, Sealing Jutsu, Reaper Death Seal. This technique is an S-rank technique that was initially created by a clan known and feared for their master in Fuinjutsu, sealing techniques, which I will get to for Naruto's sake, but you already know about them, Tsunade. So, continuing, the jutsu basically calls upon the Shinigami to seal away the target the caster selects. However, this technique does not come without a cost, as the caster of the seal must offer his own soul in exchange for calling the Shinigami into our world. So Namikaze Minato used this to seal the Kyuubi into a something, or rather someone. On that night the village was attacked. Hiruzen paused to look from his student to Naruto himself. "Naruto, the night you were born and the night village was attacked is no coincidence. Minato-kun tried very hard, but in the end, he was forced to seal the Kyuubi away, inside of you, Naruto." Not surprising, Tsunade didn't seem shocked by this at all, but the boy sure did. Yet Hiruzen knew he must continue. "Naruto, the reason why you were chosen was because only a child is able to successfully be the container for a biju. If a normal adult was to be selected to be the Jinchuriki, the biju would quickly overpower the individual's chakra due to how corrosive the biju chakra is to humans. With a child, their chakra coils are still underdeveloped, allowing the child's body to adjust and adapt to the foreign chakra of the biju. Do you understand?" Naruto just kept looking at him with wide teary eyes as he nodded his head slowly. Tsunade knew all about the sealing of a biju because of her grandparents, but something was bugging her. How did Minato come to possess Naruto in the first place, and who was his mother? Thinking to herself, she questioned. Minato wouldn't have had time to run and convince some random couple to give him their child. Especially if it was to seal away the Kyuubi no Kitsune. The only other thing I can think of would be if he was. Looking down at Naruto, Tsunade tried to picture him older without the whisker marks. She gasped at the picture and mentally kicked herself at the most obvious resemblance. Her second question was asked by Anko. "Hokage-sama, who was it that gave birth to Naruto? I mean, the Yondaime needed to meet the woman to convince her to take her child, right?" Hiruzen tensed up at the question, knowing it would throw open many more questions that he wasn't sure should be answered right now. But from the way his apprentice had looked at Naruto, he guessed she figured out the identity of at least one of Naruto's parents and would soon come storming his office if he didn't answer. Sighing and readying himself for the barrage of aggression, he looked at Naruto again. "Naruto, your mother is where your last name comes from." But this is a conversation for someone else to explain. "They have been wanting to talk to you for some time now. With that said, please lay down and lift your shirt." Still numb from the information of being told he has a monster inside of him, Naruto did as he was told, laying his head down on his new mom's lap and his legs on the weird lady's lap. The Hokage came up to kneel beside him, saying, "All right, Tsunade. Anko, please place your hand on his stomach and pump a bit of your chakra into it. If you feel a pull, don't worry." All the adults did as Hiruzen said, each placing their hands on the Naruto's bandaged stomach. A sudden pull was felt by the three adults before their world went black. The seal, Naruto's mindscape water. The sound of water could be heard all around them, but it wasn't heavy or violent. It sounded like a small river running its course to the unknown. Everyone opened their eyes, not expecting what was before them except Hiruzen. As far as the eye could see was wilderness of trees, plains, and mountains. Many rivers were flowing out to the beyond of the horizon. Anko looked around wildly in amazement due to the change of scenery, while Tsunade seemed more cautious about it but still amazed. Hiruzen smiled at the two before turning around to walk towards a giant tree with a large canopy that obscured the sky. Naruto was already standing beneath the tree looking up at something. That something just so happened to be staring back at him with red slit eyes and 9 tails flowing behind it. Naruto was confused. Obviously the thing that was staring at him was the Kyuubi, but he thought it would be, well, bigger. Naruto continued to stare while the adults walked up behind him, also staring at Fox. The fox seemed to be contemplating their existence here before its gaze shifted to Hiruzen. Everyone could feel the shift in temperature as the Kyuubi narrowed its eyes at the aged Hokage, the hair on its back raised up making it look fiercer. In a blur of speed, the Kyuubi leapt down from its perch, growing larger as it descended. On instinct, everyone jumped away with Tsunade grabbing Naruto, pulling him with her. The ground shook as the full-sized Kyuubi landed with a giant crash, making the floor beneath them quake. Raising its head to the sky, the Kyuubi let out a roar that stunned those around it. The stunned Hiruzen didn't have time to act as one of the Biju's paws slammed down on his being, not harsh enough to kill him but enough to knock the wind out of his lungs. Getting his bearings together, he looked to where his student was. She was currently holding Naruto close to her in a protective manner with Anko posed to defend them both. Turning his head back towards the Biju, he felt frightened as it was staring back at him with its teeth bared in hatred in its red slit eyes. Yet he kind of figured this would happen, as it spoke up, "Sarutobi, you son of a bitch. How dare you betray my trust? Do you have any idea what he went through?" The three not being yelled at watched on in amazement as the large chakra being yelled at the god of shinobi. What threw them for an even greater loop was its voice. Each were thinking the something along the lines of, "It's a girl?" None of them spoke up though as the Kyuubi continued its verbal barrage. "You gave your word to me that you would watch and protect him. That you would make sure no harm came to him. In so doing I put my faith and trust in you that it would be as such." Hiruzen tried to speak up to explain but was quickly quieted. "Silence, you don't get to speak right now." The Kyuubi lowered its snout closer to the Hokage. She no longer shouted but each word was dripping with venom. "Nothing you say will convince me that you haven't broken your word. A few bowls of ramen and some money does not make up for the years of torment Naruto has gone through. If it wasn't for the fact that he values those small gestures, I would have killed you on sight." The group was shocked at the anger the chakra being was showing regarding Naruto's treatment. Tsunade was expecting the Kyuubi to be, well, hostile to them and Naruto in general, while Anko was simply thinking, what the hell is going on? The Hokage finally spoke up with a groan from the pressure the Kyuubi was putting on him. "Kyuubi-sama. Yes, I know I failed him. I know that Naruto's parents won't forgive me for failing them, but I can't change what happened. I can only ensure that it doesn't happen again." The Kyuubi continued to stare hard at the Hokage before removing its paw to make its way towards its container. With each step, the Kyuubi's size shrank until it was the size of a horse when it was standing a few feet away from the three bystanders. Anko and Tsunade still appeared guarded by her, but she didn't care about that. Her focus was on Naruto, who was watching her with curious eyes. The Kyuubi's tails were swaying fluidly behind her. The hardened gaze she wore was focused on Naruto. The boy seemed to become frightened of her as he clung tighter to the blonde woman. Staring at the fox, Tsunade saw it lower itself as well as seeing the fur on its back stand up. Tsunade, because of her years of experience, and Anko, due to instinct, jumped out of the way when the Kyuubi launched itself towards the trio with its jaws open to catch them. The speed at which it came shocked them as much as the fact it was now attacking. Because she was still holding onto her now adopted son, she could do nothing to defend herself. The Kyuubi didn't give them time to rest as it was on her again, making to swipe for Naruto. Using her arm to defend them, Tsunade couldn't stop the force of the swing from the Biju as it sent them both flying towards a tree. As they sailed through the air, Tsunade moved herself and Naruto before impact so she could absorb a majority of the blow. The Kyuubi continued to stare before its attention was pulled towards Anko as she threw several kunai with exploding tags. She followed this up with a few hand signs before calling out Kaiten. "Gokakyu no Jutsu, fire style, great fireball technique." Anko released a fireball the size of the Biju as it sailed past the kunais, setting them ablaze for added damage. Tsunade, pulling herself and Naruto up from the blow they received earlier, watched as Anko's just you hit the Biju followed up by the kunai, creating an explosion that would kill most Chunin if caught unaware. However, This was the Kyuubi they were dealing with, so Tsunade wasn't too surprised when a tail shot out from the smoke to wrap around Anko's leg. She heard Anko shout, "Shit!" before the tail picked her up to swing her in Tsunade's direction. Lucky for Anko that Tsunade decided to catch her, otherwise the impact with the tree would have hurt quite a lot. Tsunade didn't ponder it long as the Kyuubi dashed towards them again. Placing Anko next to Naruto, who she had placed behind her, Tsunade stood her ground as the Kyuubi jumped towards them with its arms extended out to grab them. But Tsunade was not having any of this, not when her son was in danger. Pulling her fist back, she pushed a large amount of chakra to her hand before she punched at the Kyuubi. The extra chakra proved fruitful, as when her punch connected with the side of the Biju's face, it was strong enough to send the beast flying in the opposite direction. The Kyuubi landed rolling a few times before coming to a stop on its side. Tsunade was panting a bit as she had put quite a bit of chakra in her punch just to fend off the beast. Added to that, it felt as if she had just punched a mountain of steel. Flexing her hand, Tsunade readied herself for another attack as she saw the Biju stand back up on its feet. Its head was lowered so she couldn't see its eyes. Regardless, she would face this thing if it meant protecting her son. She swore she would from now on. Anko was now standing next to her, both posed to defend Naruto from the Kyuubi as it started shaking and ha. Ha. Ha ha, ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. The Kyuubi laughed, throwing its head in the air. Everyone looked confused at the Biju as it continued to laugh at them before finally calming down enough to speak. Oh. Ha ha. That was good. I haven't felt this comforted in a long time. Both women tensed back up as the Kyuubi started walking towards them in a calm manner before coming to a stop in front of them. First, let me apologize for attacking, but I had to be sure of something. I will explain in a bit, but right now. She lowered her gaze towards her container, who also looked wary of her, and for good reason. Trying as best as she could to appear non-threatening, she spoke up, finally addressing him. Hello Naruto-kun. As you may know, I am the Kyuubi no Kitsune, the greatest of the Biju and former guardian of the Uzumaki clan. However, you may call me Kiyomi. Everyone but the Hokage's eyes went wide at that last title. Wait, back up there, what do you mean, guardian of the Uzumaki? The now named Kiyomi looked towards Anko, her reply showing amusement at being talked to like a normal being instead of a few millennia-year-old being. The title is pretty self-explanatory, Mitarashi-san. Anko is taken aback by the fox knowing her name, almost feeling threatened for some reason. Wait, one more time, how do you know my name? Kiyomi sighs heavily, knowing that answering all these random questions was going to be annoying. How about this, instead answering your questions, allow me to explain a few things. Don't worry. Most of your questions will be answered, but I ask that you allow me to finish speaking before you ask me anything. Does that sound fair? Kiyomi looked between the three of them, completely ignoring the Hokage who had walked up to the group. All of them nodded their heads, after which she moved one of her tails to wrap around Naruto's waist and easily lifting him up. Follow me then. Naruto, you're going to sit with me. Naruto couldn't exactly complain or refuse since Kiyomi simply just picked him up. It felt weird. Of all the things he heard about the terrifying fox demon, gentle was not a word used to describe her. The Kyuubi being a her was another thing as well. Everyone always thought that the Biju were simply just forces of nature that had no gender or thoughts. They simply existed and caused nothing but destruction. So, for the strongest of them to now have her tails wrapped around him, almost hugging him even, was something that he wasn't expecting. Not that he was going to complain. Turns out that her fur was very soft as well. The adults simply followed Kiyomi towards the tree, each being sure to keep an eye on her movements in case she turned hostile towards them or towards Naruto. Despite this, Kiyomi simply brought them to a shaded spot underneath the great tree before laying down. Her tail still wrapped around Naruto, pulling him closer to her while the others sat down on the grass. Kiyomi surprised them once more by nuzzling the top of Naruto's head, like he was her own kind. Her gaze then went towards Hiruzen, giving him one last hateful glare and growl before turning her attention to the two women next to him. Now, before I begin answering your question, let me say thank you to you both. Mitarashi Anko, for finding him when you did in the alley. Believe it or not, he wouldn't have lasted another 2 minutes if you hadn't pulled the kunai from his abdomen. The seal is a sensitive area that, if damaged, limits the amount of help I can provide Naruto. Tsunade's eyebrows furrowed together in confusion, more question coming to mind as Kiyomi continued speaking. I was only able to keep his heart pumping to prevent him from dying with the way he was left. For helping him, you have my thanks. However, I do ask that you try to control yourself. Pulling on someone's tail and ears can be painful. Anko looked a bit embarrassed but quickly smiled, saying, yeah, sorry about that, Naruto-kun. But to be fair, the tails and ears make you look adorable and I couldn't help it. So, no promises that it won't happen again in the future. Naruto looked a bit worried at the prospect of being manhandled again, but Kiyomi looked amused before speaking again. Now, if for how I know your name is quite simple really. I have been using Naruto's senses to look outside of the seal. I simply overheard others say your name. Her gaze then settled on Tsunade, her eyes locking with the woman's. Both stared at each, neither one averting their gaze before Kiyomi spoke. Senju Tsunade, I would like to first say I'm sorry about attacking you, but I felt I needed to be sure if you had what it took. Tsunade cocked her head back at that, feeling a bit insulted. What were you checking to see I had? Something that all parents should have. Everyone's facial features were confused at the vague response, so Kiyomi decided to explain herself but first asked, when you think of a parent, what do you think? Anko didn't have an answer for that, being she was an orphan just like Naruto. Hiruzen didn't say anything because he knew this question wasn't directed towards him. Tsunade though already had an answer. It's someone that, after having children, put their needs and safety above their own. Kiyomi nodded her head accepting the answer. That's one way of looking at it, and you wouldn't be wrong. I however, don't think that term simply applies to those who birthed children of their own. After all, you yourself have birthed no children but had put Naruto's well-being above your own when I attacked you. Tsunade simply shrugged her shoulders. Well, of course I did. I mean, that was just instinctual. Kiyomi cut her off once more, getting a confused look as she went back to her original vague answer. When I think of what a parent is, I like to think of it as a being who doesn't think but does. Someone who, like you said, puts a child that they see as theirs, at the foremost of their mind on a subconscious level that they simply just do. No thinking about the what-ifs, simply just protecting their own. Even before we fought, you used yourself as a shield between Naruto and myself. Even knowing that I, the strongest of the Biju, was your opponent, you did not hesitate to punch me in the face to protect the boy you have decided to call your own. It's because of that very reason I feel that I can trust you more than I trusted Sarutobi Hiruzen to care for and provide for Naruto. Besides, you've already had a rather profound impact on his being already. Tsunade scoffed at the thought. Please, I've only been in his life for barely a few hours. Kiyomi smiled a bit, but her smile dropped as she looked towards Naruto. Kid, do me a favor, will you? Naruto looked her in the eye, waiting on her to ask her favor. I want you to think, and think hard about how you felt these past few years. Think back to the days you were afraid to simply walk out of your home for fear of the villagers. Back to the nights you cried yourself to sleep wishing that someone would simply be there for you. Try to remember the feeling of loneliness and the pain of being hated. Naruto looked down in thought. It wasn't that hard to do when he really thought about how he felt before meeting Tsunade. He could still see the stares, the pain from the sessions, everything he wanted when he saw parents with their children. As he thought about it, the emotions started coming back to the forefront of his mind. This is what Kiyomi wanted. She stared up at the sky as it suddenly grew dark. Everyone looked around, wondering what happened to basically everything. The once bright sun in the sky was gone, reduced to a simple speck in the now darkened sky. Everywhere around them it was raining with the heaviest downpour either of them had seen. The grass had withered to simple dirt as the trees had lost the life they once had when they entered the seal. What got them most was the temperature. Before it was so warm and comforting, but now it was cold. Like the coldness of a being whose life no longer was with them. Hiruzen looked around as best he could, trying to see at least a few feet in front of him. But there was no such luck. Nothing he did could help him cut through this cold darkness that the boy seemed to give off. It made him realize just how little he did to help, as well as how broken the boy he thought of as a grandson was. Anko was the first to recover from the sudden change. Looking back to Kiyomi, she asked, "This is how he felt, isn't it?" Kiyomi sighed heavily before responding, "Yes. For 5 years this is what his inner self has been like. What you see is the effects of a being who has been ignored, beaten, raped, and almost killed." Looking back down at Naruto, who was starting to shake and cry, Kiyomi asked, "Naruto?" He didn't respond to her, so she brought one of her tails to caress his face as she spoke. "Kid, it's okay now. You're not alone anymore. You have a mother now and you have me. We will never abandon you." Her words and her caresses seemed to have the desired effect as soon the rain came down to a small drizzle with a few rays of sunshine breaking through the darkness. It wasn't fully clear, however, but it was better than before. Kiyomi looked at Tsunade, who was staring at her container, silently thinking to herself, "What will you do now, Senju?" Tsunade looked on before seeming to come to a decision. Before it hadn't clicked on just how damaged her new son was, but seeing how his mindscape changed so drastically, it left little doubt that he would need more than just her in the future to fully heal. For now, she stood up to walk over to Naruto, who had snuggled with the tail that Kiyomi had stroking his skin and hair. When she was standing in front of him, Tsunade bent down to pick him up from Biju, who simply let him go, offering no resistance. Tsunade sat down next to Kiyomi, knowing she wasn't going to harm her or Naruto. Getting comfortable with her son in her lap, she brought his head to rest on her bosom, letting him listen to her heart, hoping to calm him down some more. Naruto felt a sense of calm wash over him as he listened to the rhythm of his mother's heart, her smell of vanilla calming him down. Naruto, it's going to be okay. Like Kiyomi said, you have her and you have me. I will always make sure to be there for you and will never let anything like what those men did to you happen again. You are my son now and that will not change, no matter what anyone says. Naruto looked up into his mother's eyes, seeing nothing but warmth and love that he had always longed for. She leaned down, bringing her lips to his forehead, leaving a small gentle kiss. Naruto sighed and leaned into it, while his inner world started changing once more. The sun finally broke through the last of the darkness, the grass and the trees coming to life with a cool breeze cutting through them. Tsunade broke off her kiss when she felt Kiyomi's tails wrap around the two of them. I wish you came back to the village sooner, Tsunade-san. Kiyomi looked at the mother-son duo when Anko spoke up, not to spoil the moment, but I for one would like to know a few things. Everyone looked towards Anko, who had her hand up like she was in school before bringing it back down. First, how are you, the guardian of the Uzumaki? Kiyomi shook her head before saying, I must apologize as that is a clan secret that only Uzumaki can learn. Tsunade-san will be allowed to learn this as she is a quarter Uzumaki. However, I am still not at liberty to discuss that with those outside of the clan since people can be untrustworthy. Anko's face looked annoyed as she whined, what? You can't just let something like that know and then slam the door in someone's face. Kiyomi smirked, shrugging her shoulders, oh well. That's not my problem. If Naruto or Tsunade want to tell you, then that is their decision. Anko just sat and pouted, making little circles in the grass as she mumbled, I like to think I'm trustworthy. Everyone laughed a bit at Anko's demeanor before Tsunade spoke up, Kiyomi-sama, I have a question. Why does Naruto have fox ears and a tail? Everyone watched as the Biju looked a bit hesitant to answer the question. Well, the thing is, I sort of made a bet with Naruto's mother. It was about how lucky she was really. Everyone stared at her incredulously before she yelled out, I didn't expect her to win. Okay. I mean, what pregnant woman walks under a ladder, breaks a mirror, spills all the salt in a restaurant, and even opens an umbrella indoors? Then after all that, goes on to clean out a casino of over 25 million ryos. Tsunade stared at the Biju as she went on to name a few of the otherworldly luck that Naruto's mother had before she interrupted her. Wait, that doesn't explain why he has the fox ears and tail. You can't just expect us to believe that he has it because you lost a bet. Kiyomi rolled her eyes saying, of course that's not the only reason. After losing the bet, Naruto's mother asked if I could give her a set of fox ears and a tail for herself so she could freak out her husband. I didn't understand it but wasn't going to push the matter. I guess when I made the changes it must have affected Naruto while his mother was still in her first trimester. Do they do anything? I mean, they're cute and all, but do they serve a purpose? Anko asked, finally coming out of her pouting. Kiyomi nodded as she explained, yes, they work as a normal tail and ears. Because of the change, his senses are heightened like that of a fox's. Better normal and night vision, enhanced hearing and smell, along with claws and a tail that can be used to fight. Tsunade's medical mind started racing with more questions that she asked. So, can I assume that the new features also mean changes to his chakra? Also, is it just the one tail or more will grow? Kiyomi turned her attention back to the two. For the first question, yes. Being an Uzumaki, who are already known for their large chakra reserves, the changes have expanded his chakra coils to almost 5 times their normal size. As an Uzumaki, the normal standard would be low Junin at age 10. However, with the change, he'd easily have chakra reserves of a cage. I suspect by the time he's at the prime of his adulthood, he would have the chakra capacity to almost rival my youngest sibling. His elemental affinity may be different as well, but I leave that to you to figure out later. Of course, all of this is just speculation since I've never done this before with anyone. As for your second question, Kiyomi just shrugged before continuing, maybe. What do you mean, maybe? Anko asked, seeing the answer provided was rather irresponsible. Not that she was the spokeswoman for responsible, but she liked to think that she made good decisions. Most times. Kiyomi replied back a bit heatedly to Anko, it's not like there's a manual on this, plus, he's the first person that I know of where my powers affected indirectly. If anything, this could be a good thing as he grows. Tsunade sighed at the response, feeling a bit annoyed by it but put it aside as she asked the question that had brought them to the seal. Kiyomi-sama, you made mention about Naruto's mother. We know that she was an Uzumaki, but we don't know who exactly. Could you please tell us, not just for our own curiosity but for Naruto as well? Kiyomi looked down to her container, seeing the hope he had in his eyes about the possible mention of his mother. Unwilling to crush that hope, she nodded before speaking. Yes, I can tell you about her and I will. Kit, your mother was by far the most idiotic, violent-tempered, and frightening woman I had ever met in my long lifetime. Naruto looked a bit terrified at the description, imagining a giant of a woman with fangs and claws tearing a warpath through villagers. Kiyomi chuckled at the looks of horror everyone sported except for Hiruzen, who chuckled already knowing the identity of Naruto's mother, having guessed she would say something like his mother was a saint. Having her fun, she continued with a bit of wistfulness at mentioning her old friend further. Despite this, she was also a very loving woman. She prided herself in the belief of family looks out for each other and people deserve a chance if they are willing to put in the effort. Many people respected her for her talent and many more for her warm personality that made you smile. She was also very impulsive, stubborn, and eccentric. Not to mention that stupid tic she had when she got flustered or excited. But she was also intelligent and a very skilled kunoichi. She could have been the Yondaime Hokage but felt that position was best suited for the Yellow Flash at the time. Her name was Uzumaki Kushina, second daughter of the daimyo and Uzukage of Uzushiogakure no Sato village hidden by whirling tides. Tsunade's eyes shot open at the name. Her voice held the surprise as she said, Kushina-chan? The Akai Chishio no Habanero, red hot habanero. That was Naruto's mother? Anko looked at her incredulously. Wait, you knew her? Tsunade turned her head towards the snake mistress saying, yes, I knew her. She was the only woman I met that could stop one of my punches. Even Hiruzen looked surprised at hearing that for the first time, seeing as his student was known not just for her medical expertise but also for her remarkable strength. Tsunade continued speaking about Kushina saying, Kushina was a woman I greatly respected as a fellow kunoichi. I felt that she would eventually take my place as the strongest kunoichi in the elemental nations. But if there was one thing I knew about her, it was that she would have made an amazing mother. When I found out she was pregnant, she had been so worried that Naruto would develop some of her quirks, including that tic that Kiyomi-sama mentioned. I think I know what tic you're talking about, having met her a few times as well. She was really kind and loved ramen as much as I loved dango. I remember butting heads with her actually about which was better. Anko laughed at the last part while smiling at the memory. Naruto watched the exchanges going on between the adults and the Great Fox, both awed at the stories he was hearing about his birth mother and saddened that he never got to meet her himself. Now he just wondered about one more thing. What did she look like? It was a simple question, but being it was Naruto who asked it, everyone stared at him with widened eyes. Even he would admit that his voice sounded foreign to him, not having made a sound since he first started talking. Everyone ignored him and told him to shut up at the orphanage, so he simply did as he was told. But now everyone was staring at him, making him feel self-conscious about speaking up. Tsunade looked down at him before she giggled a bit saying, so that's what you sound like. I was beginning to wonder if I would ever hear it. Hiruzen was smiling at the boy, having known him for years but had never heard his voice. It saddened him when he refused to speak to him or anyone else for that matter. So, hearing him now filled him with happiness that maybe Naruto would come out of his shell and let the world hear him. Kiyomi brought one of her tails to stroke Naruto's cheek. She was a very beautiful woman kit. The things that probably stood out the most were her red hair and violet-colored eyes. There were quite a few men that pined for her but quickly ran away when they saw her wrath directed at some of the other kids her age. It only got worse when she got older. Naruto smiled Kiyomi's description while leaning his face into her tail. It was very soothing and warm that he would be content to hold it all day. Kiyomi's ears suddenly perked up as she stared off into the distance. Turning her attention back to her host she said, it seems we have a guest. We will talk more later, kid. We are connected, so if you ever want to ask me anything, all you have to do is think and I'll hear you. Before she could dismiss them, Anko yelled out, wait, you didn't mention Naruto-kun's dad. The fur on Kiyomi bristled some as she stared at Hiruzen with a glare as she replied, unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to say. That responsibility belongs to someone else. Sarutobi, I suggest you get in contact with him. He has a duty to fulfill and it is high time he does it. Hiruzen could do nothing but sigh and nod at this. He knew that the person Kiyomi was talking about would have to show up eventually. Yet now with the current events, Hiruzen would have to get in touch with the one who was supposed to be responsible for Naruto. Before she sent them off, Kiyomi nuzzled her nose to Naruto once more before focusing on Tsunade. I'm entrusting you with him. Please don't let me down. Tsunade stood up with Naruto in her arms, her posture showing confidence and determination as she said, I won't. December 29th Senju Compound. Konohagakure Tsunade opened her eyes, blinking a few times to adjust to the light. Standing up, she couldn't help but feel like she had been sitting for hours. Looking at the clock, that was exactly what she had done, seeing as it was past 2 in the afternoon. Their talk had started around 11 in the morning, so they had been talking with Kiyomi for more than 3 hours. Stretching her arms to get the kinks out of her shoulders, she heard knocking coming from the front door. Looking down to see Naruto rubbing his eyes, she made her way to her door, where upon opening she was met by an Anbu. Her sensei had just walked up behind her when the Anbu member addressed them. Hokage-sama. Tsunade-sama. The council has requested your presence. I was told to inform you to make haste. The Anbu bowed before disappearing in a gust of leaves. Hiruzen sighed as he already knew he would have a headache by the end of the meeting. Tsunade looked over her shoulder to the Hokage saying, I guess we better get going. Looking at Anko who was standing next to Naruto, she was about to ask if she could watch him, but she was cut off by Anko. Don't worry. He'll be safe with me. Kneeling in front of her son, Tsunade placed a hand on his shoulder, being sure to reassure him in saying, I'll be back. Be good for Anko until I return. There's food in the refrigerator in case you guys get hungry. His response was a loud growl that came from his stomach. Naruto's face flushed in embarrassment as everyone laughed a bit before Anko bent down to pick him up. Come on Naruto-kun, let's go raid your mother's kitchen. Naruto had the biggest smile at the mention of her new title while waving bye to her. Giving a small wave in return, she walked out of her home with the Hokage next to her. Now that she had time to think on it, she worried that her new role as mother would end in failure. Despite knowing what children needed to grow and develop, she knew it would be a long road ahead of them before Naruto even resembled a normal child mentally. Even then he would forever carry the scars of his time alone. As the door closed, Naruto couldn't help but stare at it for a few more minutes while the weird but nice lady brought him to the kitchen. He still was wrapping his head around the fact that he was going to be adopted and by a very beautiful woman too. Not to mention insanely strong since she took on Kiyomi with her fists. Looking back at the weird woman, Naruto felt that things were finally going to go his way and that things would only get better from here. Hazel eyes fluttered open to the sound of bare feet running on wooden floors and hushed laughter moving past a closed door. The pair of eyes shifted to the clock hanging on the wall before a soft groan escaped from the owner's lips. The owner of the pair of hazel eyes loved all the children she and her sister wives brought into this world. But there were times, such as now, where she just wanted to strangle the lot of them. Only a child seemed to have the energy to wake up at 6 in the morning after going to bed just before midnight due to the influences of their older siblings. Jolting in a bit of pain, Tsunade groaned once more as the little ones occupying her womb were currently having their own fun at her expense. Pregnancy is special, they said. It's a blessing, they said. Lies. Bullshit. All of it, she thought as she wanted to smack the two brats currently kicking her bladder and ribs. When she gave birth to her first two children, she felt such immeasurable joy at being able to bring new life to the world. The same joy she felt when initially finding out she was pregnant once more. Yet, it was special. Moments like now that made her want to punch her husband in the face for doing this to her, again. As if on cue, Tsunade felt a warmth press up against her back as her husband brought his arm around to rest his hand on her bloated belly. Like magic, the twins inside immediately stopped their fussing, feeling the same comforting heat that she was. Giving a content sigh, Tsunade pressed her back further into Naruto's chest while placing her hand over his, interlocking her fingers with his own. She relished in the feeling of her naked back rubbing against the toned muscles of her husband's chest, the warmth allowing a soft pleased moan to escape her mouth as it sent little pleasure-tingling sensations throughout her body. The warmth reminding her of last night's activities that left her body hot, bothered, and thoroughly satisfied, not to mention eager for more. She'd started up again if it weren't for the children being awake. While during the night her and her sister wives had free rein to attack their husband, during the day it was best to be considerate of not scaring the kids for life. Or have any awkward conversations earlier than planned. Cammy knows Bolt still looks at us awkwardly sometimes. At least the poor boy learned to knock before entering, but still it would have been best if it didn't happen to begin with. While she felt the heat radiating off her husband try to lull her back to sleep, Tsunade started reminiscing on how long it felt before she got the parenting thing down. It wasn't easy at first and the mistakes she made still saddened her at times. However, no parent ever said the job was easy, but it was rewarding. Thump, asterisk. Oomph. Mommy. Daddy. Papa. Mama. Tou-san. Ka-san, it's time to get up. Come on, we're hungry, Papa, Mama, rewarding. Oog, a collective groan was uttered by the group of adults, Tsunade included, as the kids jumped on top of them in the hopes of evicting the parents from the comfort of their rather large and comfortable bed. All right, I'm up, her husband's voice lazily drawled out as he sat up. Clap, clap asterisk. All right, everyone downstairs and I'll be down to cook up breakfast. All the kids cheered and one by one began running down to the dining room to wait patiently for their father to start breakfast. Tsunade smiled at Naruto's handling of the children before he bent down to give herself a kiss, then proceeded to give her sister wives one as well. Dressing in his standard attire, he looked back at them all with a small smile. Go back to sleep, my angels. I'll take care of them. Tsunade could only think, Kami-sama thank you for him, as she and the rest of the girls returned his smile with some blowing him kisses before laying back down and Naruto closing the door behind him. Tsunade stayed up a few minutes longer as she heard another collective cheer and then asking if he could continue his story from yesterday. His laugh echoed through the halls, filling her with warmth as she knew where he would pick up his tale from. January 14th Civilian Residential District, Konohagakure no Sato. Naruto could feel the cold seeping through his gloves as he continued to pack snow into a ball. The cold front currently flowing through the land of fire had yet to recede as the ground lay covered by the beautiful white blanket of snow. Yet despite the freezing temperature, Naruto had never felt so warm before than he did right at this moment. It could be because his fortunes lately had improved with being adopted, or it could be his new friend with the lavender-colored eyes in front of him. Her smile was infectious as it caused his lips to form one as well. Her mother was currently at the hospital getting a checkup. Apparently, she had not been feeling well over that past few mornings and her Otou-san was getting concerned. From what Hinata had told him, her Okawa-san didn't seem too worried about it but went just to ease her Otou-san's mind. Naruto could understand that now since if his Ka-chan got sick, he would be worried as well. There. Finally finished, now all we have to do is move it to the other two and we can build our snowman. Hinata said with cheery voice. He smiled widely and nodded his head, happy that they could play and enjoy themselves without the other parents disturbing them. It kind of surprised him but he wasn't going to complain. Instead he went about his task with Hinata in moving the medium-sized ball of snow to use as a head for their snowman. Lifting the ball turned out to be a struggle but the two were determined to succeed and succeed they did. Happy with what they did so far Naruto went to grab the bucket he brought with the carrot and charcoal along with an old scarf. It didn't take them long to place all the items and when they finished both stepped back to inspect their work. Naruto looked over to Hinata as she spoke with pride, we did a good job. But he seems to be missing something. Raising an eyebrow at her, Naruto watched as Hinata picked up a few sticks and brought them back. He watched as she went about placing the sticks on his cheeks, making it look like, there, all done. Now he has cute whiskers like you. Naruto blushed at the statement, feeling a bit embarrassed by it. Scratching his cheek, he opened his mouth to say, thank you, but instead he heard, Hinata-sama. Looking up in the direction the voice came from, Naruto spotted a man looking to be in his late teens with brownish-black hair and the same pupil-less eyes that Hinata had making his way towards them. Ko-san. What's wrong? Hinata was confused by the look in her bodyguard's eyes. He seemed both worried and angry but she was even more confused when he called out, get away from her you filth. She looked over at Naruto who recoiled at Ko yelling at him. She was then horrified as he raised his hand and hit Naruto across the face. Naruto-kun, she called out to him before directing her attention to her bodyguard, Ko-san why did you do that? Ko turned his gaze from her friend to her as he replied, Hinata-sama, that boy is dangerous. You have been repeatedly told by the elders to stay away from him. Come along now your father has requested you back to the compound. She yelped as Ko pulled her roughly away from Naruto. Naruto himself got up to defend his friend from this man, taking a handful of snow before throwing it at the back of Ko's head. Ko whipped back around to see the boy glaring at him defiantly. Yet the fire in Naruto's sapphire eyes went out when Ko hit him full force with his killing intent. Naruto could not stop his legs from shaking as he fell to his hands' knees with tears falling from his eyes. You would do well to stay away from Hinata-sama from now on, filth. Ko said calmly but each word promising absolute pain if not followed. Her bodyguard turned back around to continue walking, pulling Hinata along with him. She was about to apologize to Naruto for what happened but was stopped when a woman's voice calmly said, excuse me Hyuga-san, but what happened to that boy? Both Hinata and Ko turned to see Senju Tsunade standing a couple feet from them. She was currently staring at Naruto but then looked towards Ko. Ko himself seemed flabbergasted at seeing the Sannin as he turned to her and bowed, Tsunade-sama, my apologies I did not see you there. As for the boy, I ask that you pay him no mind. He was harassing Hinata-sama, so I was forced to physically remove him. By this point Naruto had adjusted himself to sit on his behind in the snow rubbing the spot where Ko had hit him while silently trying not to cry. Tsunade hardened her gaze as she looked from Naruto back to Hinata's bodyguard. It made Hinata nervous but she settled down when Tsunade smiled and said, thank you for explaining the situation to me Hyuga-san. Ko seemed to relax, but that changed when his charge was pulled from his grip by Tsunade. Hinata watched as the mature blonde backhanded her bodyguard across the side of his face, the same side he had struck Naruto in fact. Hinata gasped and watched as Ko bounced across the ground until he struck a tree. She watched as Tsunade slowly walked over to her bodyguard while he was visibly struggling to just move his head to stare at the blonde. Tsunade came to a stop directly in front of the Hyuga. While she seriously considered using her full strength to crush the man that had idiotically decided to strike her son, she opted for just using a portion of her strength. He was lucky that she decided not destroy his jawbone. Standing over him, she was once again tempted to murder him here and now. However, she didn't wish to make a further scene, so instead said, "Hyuga-san, next time you feel the need to strike my son, I suggest you remember the pain you're currently feeling now. Should this happen again, I will make sure you're never able to raise a hand to anyone again. Please inform Heishi-san that Hinata is currently spending time with my son and that he can pick her up from my family's compound when he's ready." She looked down at Ko, who did his best just to utter out a pained, "Hi, Tsunade-sama." Satisfied, she smiled and walked back to both children currently gawking at her. Hinata looked surprised at what she just heard. "I thought Naruto-kun was an orphan." Okawa-san said he was when we last met and asked that I be his friend. Looking back at Whiskered Blonde, she wondered when this happened but also couldn't be happier for him. When she left him to go with her mother the first time she played with him, she caught him out of the corner of her eye looking at her and her mother with such longing that it made her want to cry for him. Her musing came to a halt as Tsunade was looking down at them before she happily said, "All right, you two, what say we all grab something to eat before heading back to the house?" Naruto perked up, and from the sparkle in his eyes Tsunade guessed what he was about to suggest. Yes, Naruto, we can get Ichiraku's. Come along, you two." With a megawatt smile, Naruto picked himself off the ground to grab Hinata's hand and pull her along as he grabbed his Ka-chan's hand to hold it. Tsunade looked down at her son, who was the picture-perfect display of happiness right now. A friend in one hand and a parent in the other. It warmed her heart to see that her son had a friend, who was currently looking a bit apprehensive about something. She didn't have to guess long as Hinata finally spoke up. Tsunade-sama, is it really alright to go to your house without my father's permission?" Putting on her best disarming smile, she looked down at the brunette-haired girl saying, "Please just call me Tsunade, I'm not big on honorifics. Also, don't fret about it, Hinata-chan. I know your father and trust me, he won't mind one bit that you're with me." Hinata still looked unsure of this but nodded just the same. Moving her gaze to Naruto, who was looking straight ahead with a smile, Tsunade silently thanked Kami for being allowed to formally adopt him. It wasn't something that was publicized yet but would no doubt come to light soon. She suspected by the end of the week, half the village would be aware. Making their way down the street with both children in hand, Tsunade noticed the glares being sent her way, or specifically Naruto's. She was quickly getting frustrated with all of it. That they all had the nerves to openly show some form of hatred to her son with her right next to him showed just how ignorant most of these were. All of them didn't do anything other than just glare, but all of it was also ignored by Naruto, who looked to not have a care in the world. Like the simple act of walking down the road holding her hand was the greatest joy to him. In the 2 weeks since she had taken him into her home, Naruto had shown that he trusted her above everyone else. He would even go as far as talking to her. That had been both heartwarming and frightening. If she was being completely honest with herself, she thought it was a bit naive of him to simply put unquestionable faith into her just because she agreed to be his mother. Yet now that he did, Tsunade worried if she would make a mistake that would break his trust, or if she did something that would be considered discipline to most adults, but would be seen by him as her not caring about him anymore. "I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I'll go insane if I keep thinking like this," she thought to herself as the small ramen stand was coming up. Pushing the flap aside to hear Tucci call out to them saying, "Welcome to Ichiraku's, please seat in my..." He stopped talking as he looked up to see his favorite and best customer with Tsunade-sama by his side and a cute little girl who he guessed to be a Hyuga judging by her eyes. "Ah, Naruto-kun. Welcome back, my boy. And Tsunade-sama, welcome back to my humble stand. Welcome to you as well, young Hyuga-sama." Hinata smiled and bowed at the greeting while Tsunade waved off his attempt at bowing before he even had a chance to. "Please, Tucci-san, there's no need to be so formal in your own shop. And once again, please drop the sama. I simply want to be referred to as Tsunade." Tucci chuckled at her saying, "I'm afraid that might be hard to do, Tsunade-sama." Tsunade scowled a bit at that but dropped it when a 10-year-old girl came around to hug her son. "Naruto-kun, welcome back." "Oh, who is this?" Ayame's question was directed to the cute little Hyuga girl about Naruto's age. Hinata, using her mannerism that her mother had been teaching her, smiled and bowed replying, "Good afternoon, I'm a friend of Naruto's. My name is Hyuga Hinata." Once the word friend left her mouth, Ayame had stars in her eyes, deciding to rush to shake her hand. "You're a friend of Naruto-kun's? Oh, I'm so happy to meet you. Please have a seat, Papa." Naruto brought a friend over. Tucci, having been watching the exchange, felt very happy and relieved at this. "Yes, I see that, my little dumpling. Hinata-sama, thank you for coming. It's good to see Naruto with friends such as yourself." Hinata felt a bit embarrassed at the praise that the father-daughter duo were laying on her. Curiosity getting the best of her, Tsunade asked, "Has Naruto not brought any friends over before?" It seemed like a simple question to her, but it looked like both the Ikarikas felt uncomfortable by her asking it. No Tsunade-sama, as you know Naruto-kun is not very popular with villagers, Chuki said, hoping his choice of words was understood. Tsunade's nod told him that it was. Now with an uncomfortable atmosphere in his stand, Chuki asked, "Tsunade-sama, if I may ask, what are you doing with Naruto-kun?" Tsunade replied with a smile, saying, "I adopted him a couple weeks ago. I figured it'd be good to go out and stretch our legs after being holed up at home for the few days." Once more all eyes were on her, yet this time they were filled with happiness. Ayame wrapped her arms around her waist repeatedly saying, "Thank you," quietly as Tucci came around his counter to shake her hand. "Thank you so much, Tsunade-sama. Truly you have no idea how grateful we are for this." Waving off their thanks, Tsunade replied, "You don't have to thank me. He looked like he needed me and I couldn't help but want to do this." Letting go of her hand, he wondered about one more thing, "But how did you manage to adopt him?" "When I tried, my request was bogged down by more red tape than I have noodles. It became impossible for me and everyone else who tried to adopt Naruto." Sighing heavily, the events of the council meeting came back to the forefront of Tsunade's mind. Flashback, Council Chambers, Hokage Tower, Konohagakure. Tsunade was 2 seconds from punching one of the civilian council members in the face just to shut him up. For the past half hour, the Konoha Council, consisting of both the shinobi and civilian members, had been arguing about why 5 of the local business owners and 2 shinobi were being held against their will in the T&I department's cells. It had been a constant back and forth from the civilian members about the injustice of their fellow entrepreneurs possibly being left at the hands of Morino Ibiki and Mitarashi Anko. Granted, Anko was still with Naruto, but they weren't aware of that. In fact, the crime for which they were being held for had yet to come up as the civilians kept interrupting the Hokage. Finally having enough, Tsunade pumped up her killing intent and shouted, "Would you all shut the hell up? If you knew why they were arrested, then you would know why they're locked up to begin with." One of the girthier civilians who had a share in the food market composed himself as best he could under Tsunade's killing pressure before speaking. "Then please, Senju-sama, tell us why the need for 5 of our local owners need to be held for something they probably didn't do." Nara Shikaku, the current head of the Nara clan, spoke up next in a tired voice like he had been sleeping for the entirety of the meeting. "I'm also curious as to why the 2 Chunins have been arrested as well. Both have shown to be quite skilled who would no doubt make Junin within the year. Not to mention that they also have a stellar record without any complaints." Hiruzen took this moment of respite to clear his throat before speaking. "The charges laid against them are assault with a deadly weapon, sexual assault on a minor, and attempted murder." Almost everyone, including the civilian members, looked towards him with a bit of shocked expressions minus a few individuals, namely Hyuga Heishi, Uchiha Fugaku, and Shimura Danzo. It seemed nothing fazed those 3, or they just had a better way of hiding it. Regardless, Hiruzen took the opportunity to say, "With these being serious charges for all those responsible, this matter was brought before the council so that we might ensure justice is met." A female civilian member spoke up after finding her voice, "Forgive us, Hokage-sama. It has been a long day for some of us already, so we are not in the best of moods. That of course does not excuse our behavior, and I for one would like to see the proper punishment is held as well." The girthier civilian from earlier spoke up next, agreed. "Hokage-sama, if the decision of the council can ease the suffering of whoever this poor girl is, then I for one will vote for her. I myself would never wish this upon my teenage daughter." Hiruzen kept his head low, the rim of his Hokage hat foreshadowing his eyes as his voice took a saddened tone. The victim was not a teenager, or a female. He let his words sink in, letting the members realize that they had been mistaken in assuming he was talking about a teenage girl. Now, these 7 men are currently being interrogated as we speak. Morino Ibiki is currently getting their confessions about this incident, including the evidence gathered by our own Tsunadeheim, and I believe this will be all the evidence we need to sentence these men to an execution. Hyuga Heishi spoke up in his formal tone asking, "Hokage-sama, who exactly was the victim? I believe their testimony would also be key to these men's trial." Hiruzen was about to say something along the lines of the victim wishing to remain anonymous since he knew some of the civilians would rescind their statements about justice. However, it was taken out of his hands when Tsunade answered for him, "Uzumaki Naruto." Almost immediately the shouting began anew. A few of the civilian members started throwing accusations saying that the charges must be false, while others were making cases for the men. On the shinobi side, many of them were already calling for the executions, the most vocal being Inuzuka Sume. Tsunade had become fast friends with Sume for her strong personality and beliefs about loyalty. Surprisingly for her though, the voice she didn't expect to hear was the calm voice of Danzo. "Hokage-sama, this cannot go unpunished. You know very well what Uzumaki-san represents, and to lose that would be a major blow to the village. As such, I make my vote that these men be executed at once." A male civilian member heard this and spoke up, shocked at what he heard. "Elder Shimura, how can you say that? You know perfectly well what the boy is," and Danzo focused his killing intent on the man, his tone of voice making it sound like he was talking down to a child. "It is precisely for that reason that I agree that these men should be executed. Young Uzumaki-san represents a significant asset to the village's forces. Losing the boy would be like losing a third of the village's strength." Tsunade didn't particularly care for the way Danzo viewed her son, but wasn't going to turn away a potential ally in this matter. Even with that being the case, Naruto is a 5-year-old child, and every act that was committed to him is already punishable by death on normal circumstances. I vote for their immediate execution as well. She wasn't surprised by Sum speaking up next. Absolutely. The fact that someone had the gall to even harm a child as young as him deserves no less than to have their head cut off. Another civilian member, a handsome man who owned a few of the gambling buildings in the red light district, spoke up. "Hokage-sama, I get that what these men did was wrong, but condemning all 7 of them for the boy is a bit exaggerated, don't you think?" The way the man stressed his words when talking about Naruto was not lost on Tsunade, and it further pissed her off at how quick a lot of the civilian members were trying to dismiss what happened to him. "Counselor, are you suggesting that we simply let these men go?" The counselor looked at her like the suggestion was obvious. "Tsunade-sama, these men are all respectful citizens of the village and the shinobi forces. Surely you can He was cut off as the part of the table underneath Tsunade's grip shattered. All eyes were once more on her as spoke. "Counselor, what I understand is that what happened to Naruto was barbaric, cruel, and monstrous. Even demons wouldn't do what they did, but despite this, you all want to simply let them go. It will be a cold day in hell before I let that happen." Elder Kaharu, who had remained silent for the most part during the yelling, cleared her throat before speaking. "Tsunade, we are not suggesting that. I too agree that they deserve to be and will be punished accordingly." She shot a glare to the remainder of the civilian members, or hardliners as they were sometimes referred to behind closed doors, who were against Naruto simply for being a Jinchuriki, effectively silencing any objections. "However, I feel the need to ask, where is the boy's current location?" Kaharu directed her question towards her old teammate Hiruzen, who cleared his throat once more. "Uzumaki Naruto is currently residing within the Senju clan compound. Tsunade Heim has even proposed to adopt Uzu." "Senju-sama, you can't be serious. That demon has no right to." Tsunade had had enough of the bullshit. Clearly many of these Naruto haters, or hardliners as they were sometimes referred by, had grown arrogant enough to call Naruto a demon in front of the Hokage and in front of her. So, she did what she felt was the only thing she should do, and that was to silence the man by punching him into the wall behind him. Everyone watched as the council member smashed into the wall, indenting himself a half-inch into the stone foundation. Many of the civilian members were horrified when the man's blood exploded out of him when his body made contact. Everyone was broken from their stupor when Tsunade's voice echoed through the hall. "Forgive me, sensei, but I was under the impression that your law about Naruto's status was still in place. I figured since he broke it again just now I could use that as a reason to finally silence these ignorant fools up." Hiruzen sighed heavily while pinching the bridge of his nose, already feeling a headache from the paperwork that would no doubt come from this. "It's fine, Tsunade, just please try not to kill anyone else here." Tsunade scoffed at the suggestion while sitting down before saying, "If they would simply learn to just keep their mouths shut, then I wouldn't feel the urge to." But regarding what the former counselor was saying, "Yes, I am serious in my wanting to adopt Uzumaki Naruto. That boy deserves any form of happiness just like you all, and I am going to do my best to see that he receives it." "I agree to this as well." Everyone looked towards Danzo, the owner of the statement that was spoken just now. If there was someone who could be a spokesman for shinobi should be emotionless, complete the mission no matter the consequences, then Danzo would be him. From what Tsunade had heard, this man tried to take Naruto into his Black Ops program to turn him into the perfect Jinchuriki. However, that basically meant turning him into another of his rude Anbu who are so cold and emotionless that they would take their own heads without a second thought if it meant accomplishing the goal. So, for someone like him to support this, was not what she had anticipated. She thought that he was going to make a pitch to take Naruto and he would have enough backing to be able to do it. Now this is a surprise coming from you, Danzo. May I ask why you feel Tsunade Heim should be allowed to adopt Naruto? And, why you feel the men should be executed? Hiruzen asked his old teammate. Danzo kept the calm facade up as he started speaking. "I will be frank for once and say that what happened to young Uzumaki-san was indeed ruthless. If this was an enemy shinobi seeking harm unto this village, I would have simply turned my gaze at what these men did. But this was not an enemy. Instead this was a boy that had an injustice done upon him that I haven't seen since the days of the warring clans. Those days have taught me to always be vigilant and ensure any threat, not matter who it may be, is dealt with. These men have shown that if they were willing to defile and attempt to murder Uzumaki Naruto, who's to say that they wouldn't try to do the same to another villager, shinobi, or kunoichi from our ranks? How can we be sure that they wouldn't even go so far as to target a clan heir or heiress? I certainly do not want men like this living amongst our great and proud village just to be a potential problem later. As for the adoption into the Senju, I feel that under the watch of Tsunade-sama the boy will grow up to be a competent shinobi and maybe even an exceptional one. It's not every day one of the Sannin is put into a position to possibly take an apprentice after all. Perhaps under the care of Tsunade-sama the boy will become a guardian for this village in the future. One that can strike fear into the hearts of our enemies should he need to. That last part sounded exactly like Danzo to Tsunade's ears. It wasn't that Naruto needed a guardian, but it was the fact that she was one of the legendary 3 Sannin, an S-rank kunoichi and quite probably the best medical mind in the elemental nations. It looked like Danzo thought that under her guidance that Naruto would be trained by her, which she did think was probable, and become a weapon that he had hoped for. It seemed that many of the council on both sides thought it would be best for that as well. Although she didn't care for the speech and the way it made her decision look like, it did turn many of the hardliners to nod their heads at this. Despite their prejudices, they saw the potential in having a Jinchuriki be loyal to the village and someday act in for its interest. Hiruzen nodded as well, rubbing his chin as he spoke. Very well. Then I hereby officially recognize the adoption of Uzumaki Naruto into the Senju clan. Senju Tsunade, do you accept the responsibility of being the boy's guardian and swear to protect, comfort, and look after his well-being? Standing from her seat Tsunade bowed towards her sensei, saying with as much conviction as she could muster, "Hi, I promise to watch and care for Uzumaki Naruto until such a time I am no longer able. This I swear. Then I hereby grant your request for adoption. May you both find happiness in the comfort of your new family." Flashback ends. Tucci looked at Tsunade in what could amount to shock but was more akin to realization. He'd heard from one of his customers that one of the market owners was to be replaced, but he didn't expect it to mean he was dead. Not that he minded, he met the man a few times and each meeting left him with a bitter taste in his mouth. Especially when the man would send questioning glances towards his daughter who wasn't even 10 at the time. Tsunade nodded, then looked down at the children currently talking amongst themselves. Well, Hinata and Ayame were talking with the occasional nod from Naruto. She really would have to get him to open more later or develop some way for him to communicate. The not talking thing wasn't going to do for her. Yet she knew that he would need time to adjust to her and hopefully the many more friends he would make as time went on. But she digressed as right now they were here to eat and then head home for a visit from the head of the Hyugas. After finishing up with their lunches the trio made their way to the Senju compound. Once inside they all quickly divested themselves of their coats before making their way to the living room to warm up next to the fireplace. Figuring that the kids could use something warm to drink, Tsunade decided to go to the kitchen and make some tea. As she started getting the water to a boil, a knock on the front door brought a curious question to her. "Hi, she can't be that quick, can he? It's only been an hour." She wasn't expecting him to be this quick, but then again if someone told her that they had Naruto then she'd be faster than the Yondaime in trying to get him back. However, this was Hyuga Haishi, not exactly the spokesman for the Loving Fathers Committee. Hyuga Hitomi on the other hand, that woman was the literal definition of a mama bear who devours anyone threatening her cub. Sticking her head out into the living room she looked towards her son and asked, "Naruto, could you check to see who's at the door please?" Her son simply nodded and did as she asked. Going back to the stove to bring the now whistling kettle off of the burner she almost dropped it when she heard, "Foxy-kun. Gee ga." When she came out of the kitchen, right in the middle of her hallway was one Mitarashi Anko currently hugging, smothering, her son with her bosom that was apparently still growing. Behind her was another purple-headed girl with a still budding figure from the looks of it. She looked to be slightly younger than Anko, who was apparently still 14. Early bloomer from what she told me, Tsunade thought, but this girl looked the part of early teenager with her hair just barely past her shoulders. The girl had on a gray coat with fur around the neck and jeans due to the weather outside, her cheeks a rosy red from the bite of the cold matching the lipstick she had on. "Hey, what the hell, where are the ears and the tail? Come on Gaki, cough it up. I want cute and fluffy." Anko cried out with Naruto furiously shaking his head no. He knew if he gave in then she would just latch on tighter and start petting him like a simple house pet. Tsunade sighed at the teenager. Yes, she trusted the girl, but it looked like if Anko found something she liked, her son's extra features for instance, she seemed to disregard personal space or secrets for that matter. Her son's fox features were still a secret that only herself, the Hokage, Shizune, for obvious reason of living together, and the excitable teenager were supposed to know. With that being said, Anko-san, would you please stop trying to turn my son into your pet? Anko looked up at her, her face twisting into a pout and whined, but I wanted to. He's much cuter with them showing anyway. Ahem. Both Tsunade and Anko looked to the other girl currently in the hall with them. I don't mean to be rude, but perhaps we can take this to a more comfortable setting. Anko blushed a bit at her overexcitedness in seeing the little blonde getting the best of her. Most times it's her favorite food that can only do that. Sorry, Yugao-chan. Oh right, Tsunade, this is one of my friends, Yugao-chan. Said girl smiled and bowed in greeting to the Sanin. Good afternoon, Tsunade-sama. It's nice to formally meet you. My name is Azuki Yugao. I've been Anko's friend since our academy days. Tsunade smiled and returned the greeting. It's nice to meet you to Azuki-san, but please just call me Tsunade. I don't particularly care for titles. Waving the teens into her home, she turned to lead them into the living room with Hinata. If we're being informal, then I ask that you call me Yugo as well, Tsunade. Tsunade laughed a bit at the girl but simply complied. Her son seemed to be trying to wiggle out of Anko's grasp, but the girl looked to have the grip of a boa currently keeping him in her clutches. As they sat, Hinata gave questioning looks towards the two new guests and her blonde friend who looked to be rather uncomfortable in the arms of the girl with the pineapple-like ponytail hairstyle. She didn't know either of these two, but her mother taught her to always be polite when addressing those you don't know. Good afternoon. My name's Hyuga Hinata. I'm a friend of Naruto-san's. Anko, being Anko, adopted a boisterous posture and pointing a thumb towards herself. I'm the sexy and vivacious Mitarashi Anko. Over there is my uptight but loving friend Azuki Yugao. She received a smack on the back of the head from her friend for that, eliciting an ow. Hinata giggled at the teenager. It's nice to meet you both. Are you two friends of Naruto's as well? Well, I am, but Yugo-chan just met him today, she said, but thought, well, met him today without her Neko cat mask, that is. Despite her friend's young appearance, Anko was very aware of Yugo being a member of Anbu. She one time met her captain, Inu, dog, right before they both took off to do Kami knows what. All the girls in the room looked towards the blonde who had been sitting in Anko's lap with her breast pressed up to the back of his head. His face was somewhat contorted, making him look constipated, but that probably stemmed from not being comfortable. Oh hush Gaki, it's not like it's a terrible place to sit. Most boys would be envious if they saw you. Instead of the blush or flustered response she wanted, Naruto instead let out a deep sigh at his predicament. This wouldn't be the first time he's been in this position. Many of the girls in the red light district where his old apartment was often took care of him, so he was fairly used to it. However, this girl was one of the first to weird him out. That was saying something considering what he's seen and the less than savory people he's interacted with. To be fair to her though, her lap would be more comfortable if it wasn't for the tool pouch digging into his hamstring, so he just decided to adjust himself. It seemed to make the girl happy as she said, Hasi told you it's comfy. Squeezed him tighter into her chest and placed her head atop of his. Hinata looked at her friend's position and wondered if he really was okay, but then looked to Anko and wondered how they met. Excuse me Mitarashi-san, howdy. Stop right there. I am not, Mitarashi-san, that's way up tight for me and I don't care for it. Besides, Mitarashi-san was my mother's name and I'm not that old yet. Anko's rant caught Hinata off guard. Her father would always scold her for not properly addressing someone. Her mother wasn't as strict, but she did stress the importance of manners. Oh okay then Anko-san. How do you know Naruto-san and Tsunade-sama? Sensing an opportunity to mess with the girl, Anko decided to have some fun but also help her now blonde pet friend by starting her tale. Well, you see, long ago, a few months really, when I was walking through the woods one day, I came across a bundle of rags. However, when I went to check out the rags, I saw that it wasn't rags but an injured. Tsunade was still in the kitchen getting a few more snacks and such for her guests, listening to Anko while she worked. To say the girl had imagination was an understatement, but she knew that the teen was telling a child's version of how she found Naruto. She had a feeling this was a way to expose Naruto's extra features, and if that was the case she wasn't going to complain. What Tsunade wanted most for Naruto was for him to make relationships and feel that he is loved and wanted. Her experience in the seal showed her that Naruto was very broken and the loneliness over the years did not do his mind any wonders. So, if one of the people who was showing to care for her adopted, made an effort to help build bonds, then Tsunade would do all she could to help. As she brought the assorted confections with the tea, Anko's story was coming to a very familiar point. The healer stood before the great demon, making a vow to always care for the orphan child, but in return she asked if the great demon would help the orphan child when he grew. To be there to help him become stronger to protect himself and those he cared about. The great demon agreed, touching the orphan child on his forehead with one of its mighty claws. Before I could say anything, The area was engulfed in a bright light. When the light ended, myself and the healer were shocked at what happened. Tsunade looked at Hinata, Yugo, and Naruto for their reactions to Anko's tale. Hinata looked enraptured at the teenage girl's tale, her wide eyes filled with awe, while Yugo, though not as mind-boggled, was no less interested in Anko's story. Naruto looked between worried and curious, as he looked to have also caught on to what Anko was doing. Hinata was on the edge of her seat, literally, when she asked, "What happened? The orphan child wasn't hurt, was he?" Anko adopted a mischievous grin, her smile unnerving the young girl before she asked, "Do you want to see?" Hinata's eyes grew wider at the prospect of the story being true, while Yugo's eyebrows went up slightly at the thought of her friend not pulling their leg. Tsunade's eyes widened slightly but figured what could be the harm. His secret would eventually not be one. She had even made plans to incorporate his tale into his taijutsu. Seeing the opportunity for what it was, she simply sat there and let Anko place her hand on Naruto's forehead, her other hand forming a ram seal. Kai, release. Naruto disappeared into a puff of smoke that started getting thinner as the henge he wore was cancelled out. Tsunade-sama, Hiyashi-sama and Hitomi-sama are here to see you. Tsunade's eyes almost bulged out of her head at the sound of Shizune entering the house with, she assumed, Hinata's parents right behind her. Turning her head to see the Hyuga parents led by her 18-year-old apprentice. Both parents seemed slightly surprised at the amount of smoke in the house, but Tsunade watched as their slight shock turned into full-blown disbelief. Turning back around, Tsunade saw her son emerge from the smoke, pointed fox ears and puffy tail visible to everyone present. "Well crap," was Tsunade's muttered response to the awkward situation that had just came up with the Hyuga clan head and matriarch, aka Hinata's parents, when they walked through her front door led by her apprentice. Now normally she'd have wanted to keep this sort of thing from happening, at least until the foreseeable future. However, it appears that wasn't going to happen, and judging by the open-mouthed expression that Hiyashi was sporting along with the questioning one his wife Hitomi had, Tsunade figured she had some explaining to do. Granted, she really didn't have to explain anything to anyone concerning her adopted son, but since it now involved their daughter, it was left to her to ease their minds on this new development. Yet before she could say anything, it was Hitomi who made the first move. All eyes watched her as she made her way towards Naruto, her poise straight and elegant, looking every bit the part of a noblewoman. Naruto, for his part, was terrified of the newcomers. He was well aware of Hyugas being an intimidating group of people, having run across them previously. He was even more afraid of the Hyuga male, who he guessed was Hinata's dad, since he had the power and money to make him disappear with no one being the wiser. Hinata's mother, however, he couldn't guess. She was an enigma, along with Hinata herself, amongst her own clan from what he's been told by Hinata. She was kind, loving, and gentle. Everything that is not shown in public by the otherwise normally cold, unforgiving, and haughty Hyuga members. He always saw her from a respectable distance when she picked up Hinata from the park, but looking at her now, even being 5 years old, Naruto couldn't deny that she looked almost angelically beautiful. Like Tsunade-kasen, Hitomi was a woman whose looks were unrivaled by most and possessed a figure that was subtly shown through her kimono, but was obviously hourglassed. Her wide hips, large bust and creamy skin complexion would no doubt be the envy of many women. This intimidating woman who was now standing in front of him, looking down at him actually, would make any man lucky to have as a wife, meaning Hiyashi-sama was a very lucky man. But as beautiful as she was, her pupil-less eyes were currently burrowing into his own, being the longer he looked into them. Naruto could feel a cold sweat run down the back of his neck as she continued to stare. Even Anko-san seemed to be affected by it when he felt her tense up. Hell, he could even feel Kiyomi inside of him begin to stir in discomfort from the stare. It felt like an eternity, but couldn't have been more than 5 minutes in reality, before Hitomi's gaze and facial features softened to and a pleasant smile formed that brought a warmth to Naruto's chest and spread throughout his body. It puzzled him on why she wasn't currently flipping out about his fox ears and the little puff of a tail that was visible for all in the room to see. Hitomi just continued to look at him with that motherly smile, even when she bent down to pick him up before sitting down on the couch next to Anko with Naruto now in Hitomi's lap. Her smile was apparently distracting to everyone in the room as no one moved or said a word to the Hyuga matriarch. Her eyes were closed and lips still formed in the gentle smile with her hand, petting him. Why must every woman I meet feel the need to do this? Naruto sighed somewhat, feeling Hitomi's hand brush through his hair and caress behind his ears. Yes, it did feel nice to be, well, petted, but he wasn't an animal for crying out loud. He was a boy. But lo and behold, when he tried to move, Hitomi's grip just tightened and for an odd reason she giggled. Slumping his shoulders in defeat, Naruto thought, girls are weird and I will never understand them. Hitomi's giggle seemed to bring everyone out of their stupor as Hinata made her way towards her mother's unoccupied side. Her curiosity getting the better of her, She reached out to one of Naruto's ears as well, giggling softly when both twitched, then proceeded to pet her friend alongside with her mother. She wasn't the only girl who was interested in the new features, as Yugao also made her way to kneel in front of the blonde before touching his ears as well. Or trying to, with the Hitomi and Hinata also vying to continue their ministrations. Anko just sat there to the side, arms crossed and a pout on her features from having Naruto taken from her while mumbling something about selfish bitches OWW. Hey. Not quietly enough, however, as she received a smack on the back of her head from Hitomi before she scolded, "Please watch your language around the children, Mitarashi-san." The tone was pleasant, but her aura when saying it suggested everything unpleasant if not obeyed. Anko was shocked enough to recoil and automatically blurt out, "Yes ma'am." Laughing a bit, Tsunade just watched her adopted son basically be in what her perverted teammate's opinion would be heaven, but judging by the look on Naruto's face, he's in anything but bliss. Looking over towards her other guest, she saw Heishi having a conflicted expression about the situation. On one hand, she could understand that this was an unexpected situation and that normal people don't have fox ears and a tail. To say it was a lot to take in was understandable. On the other hand, Tsunade was still a bit peeved at the blatant abuse laid upon Naruto earlier by one of his clan members. So, if seeing her son be doted on by his wife and daughter for being different, and admittedly adorable, made him uncomfortable, then he could go home to work the stick out of his ass and come back when he's ready to talk. Speaking of which, Heishi-san, might I ask what brings you to my home? Heishi snapped out of his daze and focused his attention on Tsunade over the blonde boy. Schooling his features, he took on a very businesslike tone and bowed to her saying, "Tsunade-sama, I came here to humbly ask for your forgiveness in regards to this morning's incident. Furthermore, I assure you that this type of transgression will not happen again." That's it. Looking around the room to see all eyes on the Hyuga clan head, she could see varied expressions ranging from curious, Anko, Yugao, and Shizune, to expecting Heishi to say more, Hitomi and Hinata. Naruto just seemed to be in his own discomfort zone from having Hitomi and the others still try to caress his ears. If she was in a better mood then Tsunade would have said, "All is forgiven," however she was not, and Hiishi's simple promise that her son would not be harmed by his clan anymore was rather insulting. "I don't accept your apology." Heishi looked up at her in confusion, probably fully expecting for Tsunade to take him at his word like most people did, but she was not going to budge on this. "Firstly, why are you directing your apology towards me when it was my son who was the victim in this little debacle? Secondly, you come here with only a promise saying that no further harm will come to him? Please don't stand there and insult my intelligence to simply believe you when you make such a promise. It's already been a couple of weeks, more than enough time for the entirety of the clans of Konoha to be made aware of Naruto's status as a member of the Senju clan. Thirdly, what sort of reprimanding have you placed on Hyuga-ko?" Tsunade saw out of her peripheral Hitomi looking towards her husband as if she expected him to make an ass out of himself, but decided to do it for him before speaking up. He hasn't done anything other than verbally voicing his displeasure. Ko comes from the main branch side of our family and his grandfather is on the clan's elder council. When the elders got word of what happened, they pleaded their case saying that Ko was simply doing his duty as Hinata-chan's caretaker and protecting her from the troubled youth, as they put it. My husband decided to agree with them, so only gave Ko a slap on the wrist, so to speak. Heishi stared at his wife in horror as she explained what should be clan business when punishments were involved for fellow clan members. Yes, he only gave Ko a warning that should it happen again he would be branded for insubordination. His grandfather along with the other elders including his father told him that Ko was in the right when he assaulted the boy. Ko himself said that he was defending Hinata's honor from the boy, but that was the extent of it. Like a fool he believed his clanman and came here with the intention of putting the blame on Naruto and getting his daughter back. However, that seems to not be the case as he was now standing in someone else's home with all eyes on him looking every bit the fool he was for believing his counsel and his daughter's guardian. Oh, so no actual punishment was given then? Tsunade's left eyebrow rose in mock disbelief, having already expected this. Tired of the confusion from not being aware of the events for this, Shizune spoke up asking, "Tsunade-sama, what exactly happened today?" Turning to her apprentice, Tsunade smiled before explaining to her and along with the other girls in the room what happened at the park this morning. "Well, I'm glad you asked, Shizune-chan. This morning I decided to take Naruto to the park so he could play, have some fun. Well, while there he decided to spend some time with Hinata-chan and enjoy themselves. That was until Hinata-chan's guard, Ko, saw them and decided to slap Naruto across the face. When he got up again to protest, Ko decided to direct a bit of his killing intent towards him. Anko, being Anko, decided to be very vocal about her displeasure. Are you fucking kidding me? Anko wanted to very much go over to the Hyuga compound and castrate the man for hitting someone who was very quickly making their way into her small list of people she cares about. Hitomi would have reprimanded the girl, but Shizune spoke up before she could. Hyuga-sama, forgive me, but you don't punish Ko-san for attacking Naruto-kun and expect us to just accept your apology. I must agree, Hyuga-sama. Surely the attack on a member of one of the founding clans deserves a better form of compensation than what was just offered, Yugo said from her place next to Anko, whom currently was sharpening a kunai while still thinking of go find Ko. Hiyashi kept a neutral expression but was inwardly frightened. He had trouble with trying to deal with his wife as it was but receiving the scolding looks by 3 up-and-coming kunoichi. One cage-level kunoichi who could flatten him then fix him just to do again, and worst yet, his wife and daughter. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, and currently he was in the crosshairs of 6 of them. Trying to find a way out, he was brought out of his thoughts by Tsunade saying, Hiyashi-sama, perhaps you should send for Ko-san so that he might properly express his deepest apologies to myself and my son. Hiyashi knew that wasn't a suggestion but a command, but regardless decided to take the out that she was giving him. Even if it meant putting one of his clansmen in harm's way, he'd do it just so he wouldn't be on the bad side of the woman he shared his bed with. Despite how much he loved her and she loved him in return, she frightened him. Of course, Tsunade-sama. I shall attend to that personally. Hitomi, Hinata, let's be off. Hiyashi made his way to the door but stopped when his wife said, That's okay, Hiyashi-kun, we'll wait right here for you. Do be sure to hurry back. With her ever-present smile on her face, Hitomi waved him off. Once Hiyashi made his way out and the door closed behind him, Tsunade finally burst out laughing at the discomfort along with some of the other girls. Oh, I'll never get tired of seeing him look uncomfortable. Reminds me of some of the constipated patients at the hospital. This caused another round of laughter even from the Hyuga matriarch and heiress, who asked, Excuse me, Tsunade-sama, may I be able to make a request? Attention in the room focused on Hinata when Tsunade nodded her head for the young heiress to continue. I know that Ko-san deserves what you all have in mind for him, but I only want to request that you not be too harsh on him. He is a good caretaker and person at heart, just misguided. Tsunade could only cock an eyebrow in intrigue and slight amusement at how mature and kind-hearted the Hyuga heiress was. Well, normally I'd say no, but since it's coming from a friend of Naruto's, I'll try to be lenient on his punishment. Ah, do we really have to? Anko asked before she cried, Ow, after receiving a smack upside the head from both Hitomi and Yugao. Yes, Anko-chan, we have to, since that's what Tsunade-sama said. Yugao scolded her friend, who pouted before she snatched Naruto off of Hitomi's lap and placing him on hers. Naruto could do nothing but accept his new seat as Anko placed the back of his head between the valley of her breast and put her chin atop his head while she groaned, Finny. Shizune walked up to kneel in front of Anko to look at her adopted little brother, examining him for any injuries he may still have. Yes, she knew he was a Jinchuriki and that almost every wound he got would heal at abnormal speeds. Well, except for the more life-threatening wounds such as the one he had received on his chest some weeks ago. That injury was still fresh and the new skin still pink and discolored compared to the rest of his body. It would be one of the many scars he would carry for the rest of his life, both physical and emotional. Doing a quick scan that showed he was fine and healthy, Shizune smiled down at Naruto, giving him a small kiss on his forehead before she asked, Naruto, are you okay? Naruto nodded his head and hummed a quick, Shizune sighed in relief as she sat down in one of the unoccupied couches. Hitomi, being the curious person she was, asked with a slight tilt of her head, Anko-san, how exactly are you so familiar with Naruto-kun? Oh, I'm his babysitter. Her proud reply garnered a gasp from her friend Yugo, who immediately looked to Tsunade. Is she serious, Tsunade-sama? Tsunade laughed at the purple-headed girl, smiling when replying, sort of. She volunteered herself to watch him one day and I couldn't find it in myself to say no. Besides, Naruto doesn't mind. Said boy had a deadpan expression while thinking, seriously, what the heck is wrong with this girl? Asanko was rubbing the tips of his ears with her fingers. Soon a comfortable atmosphere settled over the group as they all struck conversations. The subjects ranged from different foods to the ongoings of the village. Naruto simply sat down with whoever decided they wanted to hold him, being passed between the teens and the older women. Naruto tended to take more to Tsunade than the others, but, like a pet, they shared him. Even his friend, Hinata, would sit next to him to have a turn, so to speak. As everyone was enjoying some assorted treats and tea that Shizune made for them, Naruto had gone to use the restroom when a knock at the front door alerted everyone. Anko had volunteered herself to get the door to let in the guest. Upon seeing the two new guests, the comfortable atmosphere instantly turned tense as the individual was soon under the killer intent of the women sitting around the living room. Even Hinata was showing a displeasured glare towards her guard. Tsunade took a moment to gauge the appearance of Hyuga Ko. He had a tanned complexion similar to Hiyashi with long hair reaching his mid-back and tied at the end. If she had to guess, she'd say he was Shizune's age, which wasn't a good thing in her opinion because on first glance he looked much older, late 20s perhaps. It meant that he probably would be one of those unlucky individuals whose looks didn't match their age. Like herself, in fact. The young Hyuga looked like he wanted to be anywhere but in her home. In fact, judging by the way Ko's carotid artery was flaring up, she guessed his heart rate had increased due to the panic he must be feeling. She didn't blame him as he was now receiving the ire of 3 teen kunoichi and 2 veteran kunoichi. Each of them very dangerous. Ko's eyes scanned the room warily, acknowledging each pair of angry eyes before settling on Tsunade's, her own watching him make his way towards her before he stopped a few steps away. Everyone watched as he got on his knees and lowered his head to the floor, his nose almost scraping the wood as he spoke. "Tsunade-sama, I want to sincerely apologize for my rash behavior this morning to one of your clansmen. Had I known the boy was a part of the Senju clan, I never would have raised a hand towards him. No, I have the utmost respect for your clan as well as your being. Once more I am humbly sorry and request your forgiveness for this incident." Everyone watched Ko make his apology, both formal and polite. Yet Tsunade had stopped listening midway into the apology and found her tea to be more interesting than the teen performing a dogiza in front of her. It was a really good blend that she had found during her self-exile and always kept a stock sealed away in her belongings when traveling. What irked her the most about the boy was he blatantly implied that if Naruto wasn't adopted by her, he would have repeated his actions of today without any remorse. Hitomi and the other girls were looking at Ko repeat the same mistake that Heishi had made. Neither of them were going to comment on it and just decided to continue drinking their own cups of tea or assorted pastries they were eating. The sound of footsteps coming running across the wood drew everyone's attention, including Ko. The steps belonging to Naruto as he made his way into everyone's view. For Naruto, the first thing he saw was the teen Hyuga who had hit him that morning staring at him. It was somewhat unexpected since he forgot that he was coming over. But now that his eyes connected with Ko's, he took an automatic step back away from him. The teen scared him, and he didn't want to be in the same room as him. Looking towards his mother, Naruto saw that she was beckoning him over towards her, which he was more than happy to comply with. Everyone watched as Naruto seemed to tense up the closer he got to Ko. Even as he got comfortable in Tsunade's lap, the apprehension in Naruto's eyes never left. For Ko, the sight of the boy, now with fox ears and what appeared to be a small puffy tail, concerned him immensely. To him it was a sign that the boy may indeed be the Kyuubi demon of old instead of its jailer who attacked their village so many years ago. What other explanation would there be for such changes? "Ko-san, isn't there something you wish to say to Naruto?" Tsunade asked, bringing the kneeling Hyuga out of his thoughts. Clearing his throat, Ko bowed once more, albeit a bit more reluctantly, before speaking again. "Uzumaki-san, I'm here to apologize for my actions earlier. I simply misunderstood the situation and thought you were harassing Hinata-sama. I have been charged with her safety when she is not in the company of her parents, and I do not take my duty lightly. I am here to humbly request your forgiveness." No one said anything, no one moved from where they were at. Everyone just waited patiently to see what Naruto would do or if he would say something. Naruto, however, was feeling odd about the whole thing. As he listened to Ko, he kept getting weird vibes from him, as if the words leaving his voice were painful to even speak. It was an apology, but it didn't feel true or seen. Sincere. The word you're looking for is sincere, Naruto-kun. Kiyomi-san. Naruto thought, getting a throated as a reply. "Also, please stop being so formal with me. You know how much I hate that." Now, what you sensed earlier was the emotions the Hyuga boy was feeling. More specifically, his sincerity, or in this case insincerity. From what I could tell, every word that came out of his mouth didn't mean a damn thing to him. Naruto's eyes stared down at Ko as he asked Kiyomi, "What do I do then?" "That is not for me to decide, Naruto-kun. Regardless of what you say or do, we will support you either way," Kiyomi said, referring to herself and Tsunade. In the short time that Naruto had known her, Kiyomi had found her way into a parental role alongside Tsunade. Naruto liked the idea of two mothers looking out for him. Coming out of his thoughts and back to reality, he looked to his mother who was staring back, waiting on him. He didn't want to disappoint her by saying the wrong thing, but he also didn't want to say something he didn't mean. Finally, after a few minutes to ponder on his response, he said, "And no, I don't accept your apology or forgive you." Ko's head shot up and looked at Naruto incredulously, while those around the living room had shocked expressions as well. Well, everyone except for Tsunade, Shizune, and Anko, who all sported a smug smile on their lips. Ko was about to protest, but Naruto cut him off and continued speaking. "You didn't mean it when you apologized. I felt it. You weren't being honest, so I am not going to forgive you." "Who does this brat think he is?" Ko thought as his Hyuga pride flared up, but didn't say anything with Tsunade sitting there with the boy. He wasn't dumb enough to openly insult him with the strongest kunoichi in recorded history right in front of him. Not to mention what his clan head and matriarch would do if he openly challenged another clan in front of them. Especially one as revered as the Senjus. As Ko still stayed on the floor kneeling while staring at the boy, an awkward silence filled the room. Hitomi, having seen enough and waning to spare the teen further humiliation, spoke up. Ko-kun. Perhaps it's time for you to return to the compound. No? Haishi-kun. Hinata-chan and I will be staying here for a bit longer. We'll meet you at home later. Haishi knew his wife well enough to know that she was telling him to take the teen out of here and not to bother them for the foreseeable future. Being the dutiful husband, he picked Ko off the ground and basically dragged the sap out the front door. Once they were gone, Tsunade looked down to Naruto and asked, Naruto, what did you mean earlier when you said, you felt it? Naruto's ears folded down as he started to fidget with his hands like he was nervous as he said, I'm not sure. When Ko-san apologized, I could feel his aura. Think that's it. It must have been his Uzumaki heritage. Oba-sama also had a similar ability, she called it her lie detector of sorts. Able to sense the negative emotions people had as well as those with ill intentions. She even said that over time it just came naturally and even learned how to use it in combat to detect those trying to sneak up on her. Tsunade's thoughts were put on hold when Enko walked over to Tsunade to snatch Naruto away from her and sit back down on her spot on the couch. Running her hand through his hair and scratching his ears, which was oddly pleasing to Naruto, Enko decided to be her usual self and asked, Hey Naruto, do you think your friend can give me features like these? The light-hearted question broke everyone out of their serious mood as Yugao looked to her friend wondering, not that they aren't nice, adorable, why would you want fox ears, Enko? As she asked her question, her hand found a will of its own and sought to scratch Naruto's ears as well. The rest of the day went on as such, with the girls making small talk and once more Naruto being passed around like a pet. When it was Tsunade's turn to hold him, Naruto made himself comfortable and promptly fell asleep in her lap. Hinata was also in a similar position with her mother as she curled up in Hitomi's arms. Taking the hint, everyone proceeded to head out to do other separate activities. Enko needed a bit of convincing. Bribing with Dango. From Yugao for her to leave Foxy-kun. While he slept. Tsunade could hear Enko ask Yugao about a boy named Hayate but laughed as Enko shouted, OWW, I was just asking. Checking the time to see that it was almost dinner time, Tsunade looked to Shizune asking, so what do you think we should have for dinner? Shizune seemed to think on it for a bit, wondering what they had in the refrigerator to cook. Well, I suppose I can make us some stew. Naruto loves it and it's one way to get him to eat his vegetables. Vegetables were something that Naruto did not like eating. Haha, well in that case I'll help. Why? No. Shizune cried out in alarm. Tsunade's face went from calm to annoyed at the insinuation of, I can cook, you know, I like to think I'm getting better at it even. Shizune wanted to be nice by saying, of course Tsunade-sama. And I do admit you've improved, but I think Naruto might prefer if you just stay with him. Maybe watch a movie or something when he wakes up. Shizune would admit her master had improved, but she would say this as loosely as possible because of the most recent incident. You're just saying that to make sure I stay out of the kitchen. Tsunade responded more than a little insulted, yes I know I'm not the most inclined when it comes to the culinary arts, but that doesn't mean I'm horrible at it. Tsunade-sama, the last thing you cooked dissolved the spoon you were using to cook with. Back and forth the banter went through the evening until eventually it got too late to make anything, so the trio went out to eat, much to Naruto's joy to be able to eat at a restaurant with his mother. Tsunade's annoyance about her cooking skills were forgotten as she watched her adoptive son, while Shizune felt relief about her master staying out of the kitchen for a bit longer. May 27, 7:47 p.m. Clan District. Senju Clan Compound. Konohagakure no Sato. Tsunade was walking home from another day at the hospital, her shoulders stiff from sitting at a desk for most of the day doing paperwork. The evening sky was signaling many people that the day was ending and it was time to head home. She was tired and in need of a drink. It feels like forever since I last had a sip of sake. Why does Shizune have to be so hard on me about drinking? She thought with some annoyance. As quickly as the thought entered her mind, it was just as quickly replaced with thoughts of Naruto. The little tight was starting to grow on her. Yet sometimes she contemplated if she was a bad parent, since even Tsunade liked Naruto, she wouldn't say she loved Naruto. A lot of times it felt more like going through the motions of what a parent might do. It unsettled her, but she was told that this feeling was apparently normal for adoptive parents. She spoke to Hitomi and Sume, being the only mothers she knows for now, about her thoughts, and both said generally the same thing, that she'll eventually come to see Naruto as her own flesh and blood but not to rush it. That Naruto and her needed time and would come to a point where everything would be natural and they would be a family. Tsunade, however, was pretty sure it was just her that had yet to reach that point. She was very sure that Naruto already saw her as his mother, blood or not. The little things he did, like always hold her hand when walking around the market district, staying by her side and helping with chores when at home on her day off. A big one was every now and then she would find him curled up next to her in her bed in the mornings. While it did make her slightly uncomfortable, she also couldn't deny that he was adorable when he slept. He wouldn't wear the henge in the compound, so when she would wake up before him often she would watch him sleep. Every so often while he slept his ears or tail would twitch, which made him even more cute. But just as often his eyelids would shift, like he was having a bad dream or something. It would explain why he would come to her bed. Her internal musing was ceased as she came up to her front door. Right now, what she had in store for herself was to sit down on the couch and relax with a nice warm cup of sake and maybe some dango that she had picked up. However, as she opened her front door, what greeted her was a sight that she wasn't prepared for. Her son running past the living room, naked as the day he was born. "Get back here, you son of an exhibitionist," with an equally naked Anko chasing him. "Anko, wait. You can't be running around like this." Followed by her towel-clad apprentice, adoptive daughter chasing them with towels in her hand, probably the ones they were supposed to be wearing. Tsunade just sighed, simply nodding her head in acceptance of the situation, and went to sit down. Of all the things she expected when she walked in, seeing a naked child with a tail running away with a well-figured teenager and a barely towel-clad teenager was not on the list. "It's time for your bath now, get that furry little ass over here," she heard Anko yell from the second floor. How in the hell did they get up there? Tsunade wondered, since the only set of stairs were just off to her left. Pinching the bridge of her nose at the absurdity of what her home was becoming, Tsunade just went to the kitchen cabinet to pull her reserve sake so she could relax. Sitting down to relax, the sounds of splashing could be heard upstairs along with Shizun's muffled yelling. "Anko, please be careful with Naruto-kun." Sounds like Anko finally caught the little gaki. She laughed at this, knowing full well how much of a hassle Naruto could be during baths. It must be his animal instincts protesting about the thought of being cleaned, or it could just be only Anko, since she has more of a habit of focusing on his ears and tail than the rest of him. Several minutes passed and Tsunade was enjoying her 6th cup of sake and 3rd stick of dango when a fully dressed and cleaned Anko came down with a pouting Naruto in her arms, followed by an exhausted-looking Shizun. Naruto, seeing his mother, climbed out of his babysitter's arms and ran to greet her. Setting her cup down, Tsunade smiled a bit as Naruto jumped into her lap, wrapping his arms around her neck, saying, "Welcome home, Ka-chan." Giving him a gentle hug, Tsunade patted his head, saying, "Hello, Naruto. Did you have fun today?" Her question brought amusement to Anko, her ever-present grin widening as she said, "I'll give you 3 guesses on what happened today." Tilting her head to the side, she tried to think of something that would leave a good impression on Anko, and judging by Naruto's excited expression, was a very good thing. Shrugging her shoulders, Naruto finally couldn't contain his excitement as he happily said, "I made some new friends today." Flashback, May 27th, 11:47 a.m. Konohagakure no Sato. Naruto poked his head out of a bush as he scanned the area in search of his pursuer. Using his skills at hiding to the best of his ability, Naruto crawled through the brush, trying to silently move to a better hiding spot. Yet his sneaking was all for naught, as a whispered, "Found ya," was spoken into his ear, making him jump out of his hiding place. Anko's boisterous laughing could be heard as Naruto rubbed his rear as he landed roughly on the ground. "I can never win against you," Naruto complained, his speech coming out better than it had when he met Anko those many months ago. He would only talk to those he was comfortable with, however, so Anko considered it a great sign of trust to be able to hear him speak. Placing her fist on her hips, she smiled widely, saying, "Well, of course you're not going to win yet. I may only be 14, but I still am a chunin and can easily whip that furry soft butt of yours in any game you want." Anko's head looked towards the sky to get a gauge at the sun, but seeing as it's about time for lunch, what say I go get us something to eat and meet you back here? Naruto nodded his head and went to sit down under the shade of a tree to wait. Leaning his head against the bark, he sighed contentedly as a cool breeze rolled past him. When he had turned, Anko had already disappeared, so he was alone now with his thoughts. Yet it wasn't long before his peaceful rest was interrupted by the sound of shouting. It wasn't loud, but Naruto could tell that it was close by. Curious at what the commotion was, he got up from his comfortable position and made his way to the sound. His journey had brought him to a clearing where a single tree surrounded by a field of flowers lay. The field was beautiful with all the assorted colors of red, yellow, and white. Yet the reason that brought him there was slowly starting to piss him off in a dangerous way. Just to the right of the tree was a large group of kids about his age, one restrained by 2 others while a third was punching him. Another group, 3 more boys, were holding back a set of 3 girls from going to the aid of the boy being punched. The boy being punched was about his age, maybe a few months older, but he couldn't tell from where he stood at the tree line. His most noticeable feature was his black hair, black as a raven's feathers, that looked to be spiked at the back of his head. It reminded Naruto of a duck butt or something similar. It would have made him laugh had the situation not been what it was. The girl's being head back also stood out too. Like the boy, he couldn't really see specific features except their hair. The first girl had black hair as well. It was long and looked like it reached the middle of her back. The second girl had blonde hair that was cut short, barely reaching her neck with what looked like a hairpin holding it back. Finally, the last girl was probably the one that stood out the most, with bright pink hair with a red ribbon on top of her head. Her hair reminded him of the petals on a sakura trees when in full bloom. Naruto was brought out of his observing when another punch was sent to the boy being held. Seeing that he needed help, Naruto rushed over to the group as quickly as he could without the bullies noticing him. As he came upon the bully doing the hitting, Naruto brought his hand back and punched him across the jaw as hard as he could muster. Not bothering to look at the first boy as he landed on the ground, Naruto turned towards the two boys holding the ravenet, their shocked faces almost comical. Cocking his left hand back, he threw his punch at the one holding the ravenet's left arm, catching him squarely on the bridge of his nose. The blow forced the boy to release his hold on the arm, allowing the ravenet to grab the other boy still hold his right arm, bringing him down so his face could meet his knee. The other three boys who were holding the girls back immediately jumped in to help their friends, two going Naruto while the third went to hit the ravenet with a wild right haymaker. One of the boys jumped at Naruto using his full weight to bring him to the ground while the second knelt down to start punching at whatever he could hit on the whiskered blonde. Naruto didn't stay idle though, as after taking a punch to the stomach he grabbed the kid's arm when he missed a shot to his face and bit his forearm. The boy cried out in pain and pulled back, while the first boy went to punch Naruto who just kicked him off. The third boy, who had attacked the dark-haired boy by himself, soon found out that, despite his age, the ravenet was already a shinobi in training. The third bully sent a right straight at the ravenet, putting his full weight into the swing. A mistake that was capitalized upon as the dark-haired boy sidestepped the swing while grabbing his wrist with his left hand while using his right hand to take hold of the boy's collar. Using the momentum of the third bully, the ravenet turned to bring his opponent over his right shoulder in a shoulder toss before he slammed him into the ground. As the three boys who were just getting up from Naruto's surprise attack, the girls finally had enough and starting throwing loose rocks at the six bullies to help the two who were fighting them. Realizing that they had better leave before they got any more injured, the six bullies left running with the girls continuing to throw rocks at their backs. The ravenet, sporting a few bruises and a busted lip, turned his head towards the sun-kissed haired boy about his age who had his hands on his knees breathing heavily. "Thanks," was his simple sign of gratitude. The blonde boy just gave him a nod and a thumb up. "Sasuke ni, are you okay?" Naruto looked towards the owner of the voice, turning out to be the other ravenet. Now that he was closer to distinguish the children in front of him, he was pleasantly surprised by their individual looks. Both of the black-haired children had enough similar features that Naruto could have guessed they were siblings without the girl confirming it, such as their onyx-colored eyes and somewhat sharp features. Unlike her sibling, whose hair was smooth but spiked in the back, her hair was straight with no spikes. Its length was fairly long for her age, which Naruto guessed to be around his age of 5. Her outfit consisted of black long-sleeve loose shirt that went past her waist with a pair of white leggings that stopped at her knees with black open-toed sandals to complete the outfit. Looking at her brother, his outfit was similar to hers. He was wearing a blue, almost black, high-collared short-sleeve shirt with white shorts that went just past his knees. White wrappings covered his shins and ended with black sandals as well. "Yes, Ne-san. I'm alright. Nothing too serious to worry about." "Still, Sasuke-kun, you shouldn't overexert yourself after being hit like that." Naruto turned his head to the voice, staring at the girl with bright pink hair. Other than the red ribbon that he noticed earlier, she also wore a dark navy blue long-sleeved shirt that stopped at her forearms with 3 diamonds on the sleeves. Light green shorts that went past her knees and open-toed brown boot sandals completed the outfit. By far though, the most striking thing to Naruto was not her hair but rather her light green eyes. They looked like light emeralds to him, which made her look cute. Finally, the last girl, another blonde though with a lighter shade than his own, came up to him and asked, "Thank you for the help. I'm not sure what we would have done if you didn't show up. I'm Yamanaka Ino, what's your name?" Taking in her appearance, he saw that she wore a spaghetti-strapped orange shirt with a white skirt that passed her knees. Like the pink-haired girl, she too wore brown sandals that went around her ankles. Once more, what Naruto looked at more was her eyes. They were a blue like his but unlike his own sea blue. Hers was more consistent shade with the sky but were pupil less like Hinata's. Clearing his throat, Naruto answered shyly, Uzumaki Naruto." The past few months he had gotten better about speaking to others, specifically those he interacted with, but he was still skittish about meeting new people, even those his age. Ino tilted her head at the name, asking, Naruto. Like the fish cake. He silently pouted at that comparison. It wasn't the first time he'd been called that and probably wouldn't be the last. Kiyomi Okasan said his parents intended it to be more of the maelstrom than a fish cake. Ino laughed at his expression and offered a hand. Anyway, thank you again for helping us. Oh, by the way, the girl with pink hair is Haruno Sakura, and the twins are Uchiha Sasuke and Naori. Uzumaki-san, do you want to play with us? We were thinking of using the forest for hide and seek, Naori asked their helper. All eyes were on Naruto, making him nervous from the stairs. He replied by nodding his head yes. Sakura was about to say something when a voice from behind the group said, Mind if I play too? They all jumped back to see a teenager in a brown trench coat, making new friends Foxy-kun? Naruto scratched his cheek with a finger and shrugged as a response. You know her? Sakura asked with a raised eyebrow. Enko answered for him saying, he sure does. I'm his babysitter and protector of sorts. I'm the up-and-coming sexy Midarashi Enko at your service. She ended her own introduction with her hands on her hips and a large smile on her face. It's going to take years to get used to her enthusiasm. Naruto sighed and nodded at Kiyomi's statement while the others looked at Enko like she was nuts. Which wasn't far from the truth really. Clapping her hands to break the mood, Enko said, So, I'll be it and you all can hide. I'll count to 30 before I sick my snakes on you. Her tone was so jovial that the children almost missed the important part of what she said. Sasuke caught it first before slowly emphasizing on the word, snakes? Yup, big ones too. Now 1, 2, is she serious? Naori turned to ask Naruto, only to see said whiskered boy running away. 10. Ino turned back to yell, Hey! You can't just skip numbers. Enko shrugged nonchalantly, Pay attention then. 14. At this point they got the message and followed Naruto's example, running for the trees. 18, 25, 30. Go get them my little minions. Enko shouted before she set loose 5 pythons the size of her double arm span. Through the rest of the afternoon, Enko's demented joyful laughter and the screams of children could be heard in the forests. Flashback end Tsunade looked towards the teen and could only shake her head. These kids are going to be scarred for life after what they endured. Looking down at the smiling face of Naruto told her that he didn't mind at all and was simply happy to have made new friends. Well, as long as no one was hurt, then I'm happy you were able to play with some children your age. Yuha. Nori and Sasuke said I could come over and play whenever I get the chance. That way I can meet their parents as well. Naruto said, secretly hoping that his mother would come with him. He wanted to go but not alone, and bringing her along would make him feel less nervous about meeting Naori and Sasuke's family. In that case I'll set aside some time so I can go with you to meet their parents and see if it's okay to set up a playdate of something. Tsunade offered, getting a bright smile from her son. Thank you Ka-chan. He hugged her tightly before getting off her lap and headed upstairs followed by Enko. Shizune stepped up and mentioned something else that happened while the Naruto was out of the house. Tsunade-sama, I was asked to give you a message. Apparently, it's from Kusagakure no Sato, village hidden in the grass. This piqued Tsunade's interest as it wasn't normal for her to receive messages from another village, but she was also cautious about this since despite being allies, that didn't mean Konoha and Kusa always saw eye to eye. Hokage-sama already verified it before he passed this on to you. Shizune explained as she picked up a scroll before handing it to her master. Opening it, Tsunade read through the contents, wondering what this was about. A request for medical aid. They want me to go there and assist with their wounded. Shouldn't this have been brought to the council? Surely I'm not authorized to approve of such an endeavor. Shizune nodded, replying, correct. However, due to the time constraints of the request, Hokage-sama felt that it would be more time expedient if the decision for aid was left to the village's chief medical resident. Tsunade frowned. It was basically putting a Hokage-level decision in her hands. On one hand, she could refuse this request, keeping the medical and support staff she'd be taking with her safe from whatever harm has befallen Kusa, yet in so doing straining relations even more between the villages. On the other hand, going would improve whatever situation was occurring in Kusa that required their aid while strengthening the alliance they had, yet would place a target on her people's back for helping. One thing was certain. Whatever decision she made, it was a no-win situation. Sensei, just what are you thinking by doing this? Thanks for watching. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.